Hello, and welcome. I am Chilling Tales, and as you get ready for bed, you must know that you are doing amazing and you deserve all the sleep you can get. So as you are winding down, let me know where you are from and what time you are watching this video. Like and subscribe to help the channel if you'd like. Now put your mind at ease and let the story unfold. The last time the moon showed its face in our valley, I was 12 and didn't know what it meant to count your breaths. Back then, the mountain wore a winter cap of cloud, and the town street lamps painted a respectable circle on the cobbles. And if a dog barked after midnight, the sound ran along fences like a rumor, then faded. The moon came up silver and whole, and the old men stopped their cards and the old women stopped their knitting, and everyone looked up as if something had entered the room without knocking. It was a good harvest year. It was before the flood, before the mill burned, before we learned to measure nights by what didn't happen. After that, we didn't see the moon again. Not once, not for 19 years. We spoke around it the way a family talks around a bad father. Weather forecasts said overcast. So many times it became the shape of a week. The nightly news showed satellites and low-pressure systems, like children lifting a bedsheet to prove there is nothing under it. People who moved here learned quickly not to mention the sky. Tourists tried to film the mountain halo and learned quickly their batteries died on that ridge, and their files corrupted with a soft, bubbly noise like water boiling over a low flame. We grew used to it, the way you live with a limp. We put better bulbs in streetlights, then gave up when they buzzed themselves to death. We replaced curtains with heavier cloth. Mothers told babies stories about old moons that lived in picture books with glitter, and toddlers pressed their hands on the foil and whispered like praying. The rest of us pretended not to notice the way calendars made us tired. I work nights. I don't need to say what kind, just enough to keep cash in a jar and lights on in a house that deserved better. The job suits people who don't mind being invisible. Sometimes I think invisibility is the only honest thing we have left. On the 19th anniversary of the last moon, I took the long road home from the edge of town because the short one had a police car, and I am too old to watch anyone explain themselves. It was 2 in the morning. The wind smelled like a change that hadn't decided what to be. The mountain's snowcap glowed a dull, reliable gray. I counted my steps from the turnoff to the footbridge because the boards there have a way of remembering names. 37 steps, 38, 39. At 40, the world brightened, not like dawn. Dawn is patient, a soft hand on the back of your neck. This was the light in an empty theater when the house manager hits the wrong switch. The river took a breath like a surprised animal. My mouth dried. I looked up because everyone looks up, even people who swear they won't. The clouds were thinning, not breaking. Thinning, as if someone had pressed their thumb into the wool and left a shallow bowl. A pale coin showed through. It wasn't much, enough to throw shadows where there hadn't been any, enough to make the footbridge planks admit they were wood and not simply floor, enough to make the hair rise on my arms in a way that remembered being 12. Dogs woke across town, not the sharp alert bark, the low note dogs use when they smell a visitor they recognize and don't like to remember. On the far side of the bridge, the old radio smith's windows filled with light, although he's been dead 3 winters, and his son never learned tubes. Somewhere a set of wind chimes remembered that it was built to sound like glass, not tin. I wanted to go home. I wanted to call my mother, and I wanted to stand in the street like a fool, and I wanted to walk into the river and let it decide. Instead, I did what people do when they are afraid. They are part of a story. I kept going the way I had planned and tried to make my feet uninterested. The first scream came from the direction of the mill ruins, not a movie scream, the sound someone makes when they see a memory coming toward them with teeth, then another, behind the church, then the kind of silence that visits a room where everyone is listening for the same thing at once. I cut through the grocer's lot, and the grocer, who keeps a bat by the freezer for rats, stood with it on his shoulder and didn't seem to know what it was. "Do you see it?" he asked, like we were boys daring each other to climb the water tower. "It's just a moon," I said, and the word just was the lie, and we both heard it. The clouds thinned more. The coin became a face. The face became an eye. The light sharpened. The street glowed in dull stripes, where gravel decided to be individual stones again. The grocer's bat had a small notch near the handle, and I knew suddenly it came from the night last summer when he missed and hit the shelf and pretended he meant to. This is what moonlight does when it's been gone too long. It tells you the truth about surfaces. We didn't talk about what else it tells. On Ash Lane, a boy named Felix had his first kiss against the lip of the old quarry, and he did not know that the person kissing him had carried a knife there for other reasons. In the cemetery, Mrs. Velez counted names in the row where her husband would have one someday, and the light hit a certain letter, and she put her hand over her mouth as if she had interrupted a conversation. At the bend where the road swings past the basswood, someone I will not name pulled a car into the ditch and stayed there, gripping the wheel as if it could make him smaller. And me? I got home to a house I rent from a woman who believes in cash only and saints who like tea. The moonlight reached the stoop and decided the door needed washing. Inside, the light fell on my kitchen table, and everything I'd done there that shouldn't be seen stood up and said its own name. I shut the curtains. The light was thinner through fabric, but it was the kind of thin that makes you feel dishonest. I turned on the stovetop fan to mix the air and boiled water that didn't need to boil, and stood with my palms on the counter until the sound of the fan matched my breathing. A soft noise came from the back of the house, and I told the old pipes to go to hell, and then I told myself the old pipes had every right to be, just like the rest of us. It wasn't the pipes, it was my neighbor knocking on my back door. She's a nurse and sleeps when she can, and her hair in a moonlit window makes her look like her mother, which is a complicated kindness. She pressed her forehead to the glass and said, without preamble, "They're calling out the names." "Whose?" I asked, though I knew. "Anyone's. Everyone's. This is Res." She gestured at the sky, then at herself, as if she had forgotten which of us was larger. "You can hear it if you stand in the hall where the stairs used to be. They're saying them like the way the priest reads a list when he's irritated with it. Fast but careful." I went with her because people do. The hallway in her house remembers a second set of stairs the previous owner ripped out to make a long closet, and sometimes if you step exactly where the fourth stair would be, your ankle decides to fold. We stood there shoulder to shoulder and listened to names fall through the ceiling like slow rain. My name was there. So was hers. So was my mother's maiden name, which the town never uses. So was the grocer's dead father. So was a girl none of us had seen since she cut her hair and left before breakfast 13 years ago. We whispered yes when we recognized one, like librarians alone in the stacks. Eventually the list looped, and it was worse hearing it the second time, because then you knew who you were waiting for. The nurse squeezed my hand. "Do you smell it?" "What? Metal?" I did, not like blood, like coins in a new fist. We aren't idiots. We have always known what hides in stories that mention moons and names and lists. It is one thing to know. It is another to live it. There are rules. Every culture that has mouthed this fear has come up with a different apron to put on it, but the body is the same underneath. Do not run. Do not look over your shoulder, but do track with your ears the way a deer tracks wind. If you can, get to iron. If you can't, get to a door frame. The first person you see is not the person you knew. The second one might be. Do not say your name if someone asks. Do not answer a voice that says your name in the tone your mother used when she was tired. If you must cut, cut clean. If you cannot cut, climb. If you cannot climb, curl into yourself and think of water and think of dawn. All of this is good advice. All of it is the kind of advice that deserts you when you need it most. From the street came the sound of someone crossing on four limbs because two didn't seem sufficient. A trash can went over. The lid rolled with comic obedience to physics. A laugh followed, too close to words, not joy, not mockery. Testing. You've heard people make that sound when they've had just enough to drink to think about fighting. The long vowel where they decide. The nurse went to the front room, and I followed. She's the kind of person who stands in doorways and makes a shape the room can use. The moonlight filled the street, not evenly, but in pools where it found spots to gather. In one of those pools, Mr. Kozak from the barber shop crouched with both hands on the ground as if the earth were a new instrument. His ears were wrong. He had never been a beautiful man. The moon was not interested in making him one. His eyes had a distance in them that could be confused for thought if you wanted to be kind. His breath was a careful machine. He smelled the air as if it contained instructions. I whispered his name because I am that kind of fool. He turned his head slowly toward the window and did not see us at first because the moon caught itself in the glass and told lies. Then he saw me. When an animal recognizes you, it does not blink. He did not blink. He moved toward the door, not quickly. The nurse put her hand flat against my chest and pushed me back 2 steps. She lifted a chair and set it under the knob the way people do in movies. The chair slid on polished wood and sighed. Something on the back porch muttered in the voice of her long-dead brother for exactly 3 words, "Let me in," and then went quiet as if embarrassed. She put both hands on the door and said no in a voice she uses for certain family members, and the door remembered being a tree. From up the street, someone ran. Running is a rhythm, and rhythms are roads. The not quite Mr. Kozak's head snapped toward the sound, and he moved faster than a man his age, with his bad knee should move. Somewhere a bottle broke, singing itself as it went. Somewhere a woman said God in a tone that could get her into any heaven. We waited. Waiting is the only thing a house requires from you when the night is deciding. The nurse and I sat with our backs to the wall and counted steps when we heard them and counted breaths when we didn't. I thought of dumb things, the route the mailman takes on Thursdays, the price of onions, the way my mother used to tap the table twice when she wanted me to stop but couldn't say it in front of company. Outside, the list of names had stopped. The house creaked as if it were trying to turn in bed without waking its spouse. The moon climbed, and the light became the aggressive white of a bathroom bulb in a cheap motel. I heard the river change its mind about what direction was down. The mountain murmured in its sleep like a plumber on his back under a sink. A hand tapped politely on the glass behind us. I didn't jump. You only jump the first 10 times in a life. I turned my head very slowly and found my own face looking back at me from the window pane, ghosted by lamplight. For a second, dumb animal hope rose. Someone else, the old stories, a warning. Then my reflection breathed in time with me, and I hated it the way you hate someone who looks too much like a stranger when you catch them in the mirror at 2 in the morning. The nurse's phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't check it. We both knew the battery would show 1%, no matter what it had been a minute ago, and any text we saw would be either a decade late or a few hours early. The first time the moon came back, someone answered a ringing landline and spoke to his mother 2 years dead. He said it was a recording, but couldn't find it again after the night passed. The second time, Ms. O'Hara opened her email and watched new messages sort themselves by age, like a deck of cards with names she had forgotten she'd lost. The third time, a radio station started carrying a baseball game from the year we still had a team. You learn what to pick up and what to let ring. When the howl came, it came from behind the grocer's. It wasn't a wolf's. It was a voice stripped of words. the sound of a person at the exact age where rage is a coat that fits, men who hadn't stood since the plant closed, stood, women who hadn't put their hair up since the last wedding put their hair up, old people bowed their heads, children who'd been born in the dark turned their faces to the light as if something had reached through skin and tugged. The nurse said very softly, "If you have to do it, you do it clean." "I know," I said, and discovered that I did. We didn't go out, other people did. It is hard to write the night because it wrote us. I saw figures cross the street fast enough to leave a second figure behind them, made of light. I saw a shadow detach from a fence and decide it had been wrong about the fence, then return to it with relief. I saw two shapes grapple in the alley like a tangled conversation and then step apart, and one of them wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, and the other smoothed her dress, and they both walked away, and in the morning neither would remember whose house they came from. I slept sitting up, head against the wall, neck at an angle that would punish me all week. I woke to quiet that pretended to be ordinary. The light had softened. The moon had gone behind its old curtain, as if it hadn't been in the room at all. In the street, someone had dragged a hose to the gutter, and the water came out pink and then clear. The nurse made coffee stronger than it needed to be because she likes to test her heart. We went out together, and the town did the thing towns do after disasters. We decided what the story was going to be. The grocer boarded a door that had lost interest in hinges. Mr. Kozak swept his stoop and did not, for the rest of his life, touch his ears in public. The parish ladies collected the names of those who hadn't come home and wrote them on index cards and stacked them with rubber bands in a drawer no one else uses. I walked down to the bridge with a bucket and threw water over the places where footprints looked more like paws than feet, and told myself I was trying to keep the smell down. When someone asked about the list of names from the hall where the stairs used to be, the nurse said radio interference, and the person who asked accepted it because people who live in valleys learn what to blame. That night, the clouds were obedient again. The mountain put its hat back on. Dogs slept like they'd done a job. The river went the way it always goes. We all pretended to be relieved, but relief is a muscle, and if you use it too much, it shakes. 2 weeks later, the light rose again, not as bright. The coin kept its thumbprint. The list began sooner, in another part of the house, this time in the gap where the dumbwaiter once ran. Different order, different names at the top, same careful tone. We didn't wait for the howl. We didn't need to. The town was ready in a way that makes you proud and sick. You want me to tell you it was wolves, that it was a man, that it was mass hysteria, that the mountain houses a frequency that rattles fillings and makes people do religious things and bite. I can't. All I can tell you is what it felt like to live inside a town that keeps itself small on purpose and then watches something bigger put its hand over us and ask us to breathe with it. I can tell you what it is to walk on all fours because the ground has learned your name and wants to hear it the slow way. I can tell you that some people came back with scratches they couldn't place, and some came back with debts they refused to pay, and some didn't come back, and we folded their names into drawers and told the children different stories about where doors lead at night. And me, the third night the moon returned, I went to the bridge early and sat in the shadow where it couldn't find me. A shape joined me there. Not a man, not anything you could elect or arrest. A presence like a posture you remember from someone you loved. It didn't speak. It didn't need to. It smelled like coins and pine pitch and the inside of a new barrel. It pressed warmth into the air like an animal that had lived too long outside and remembered blankets. It leaned its weight against the post, and I leaned mine back the way you lean against a friend when there's only one bench. When it was over, I went home with blood under my nails and a voice in my throat that would not be mine for a while, and a name in my ear that I will not write. I washed my hands. I slept. I woke. The nurse knocked at the back door and handed me a cup and did not ask. We sat in the kitchen while the fan tried hard and failed to drown out the memory of light, and we decided what words we would use if anyone asked, and we decided that if anyone asked too, well, we would move, and we decided that moving is only a different kind of staying. Since then, the calendar doesn't make sense. The moon comes when it wants, a thin glance at a bus stop, a bright slap at the river, a sudden coin above the grocery when the delivery truck's back is open, and the cases of tomatoes shine like somebody's idea of a heart. We are not surprised anymore. We are careful in pairs. We keep iron where it makes sense, and sometimes where it doesn't. We speak our names aloud at noon, so they are heavy enough to hold at night. We keep a list of who should not be met on the street after midnight when the light is white, and we keep a list of who should be walked home, even if they say they don't need it. On bad nights, the list of names comes from the hall where the stairs used to be, and from the dumbwaiter shaft, and from the crack in the cellar wall that lets in a thread of river smell, and from the mouth of the stove, and from the back of my own teeth. I put my hand on the table and count to 40 and don't get up. On good nights, the clouds are stubborn and the dogs snore, and I make soup with onions for the smell, and the nurse sits with me, and we play cards, and we both look at the window at the same time, for no reason at all, and are pleased when the glass is only glass. Sometimes I go back to the footbridge at 12 and try to remember what it was to be a child in a night with a proper moon, the kind that made raccoons look like thieves and made my mother say curtains, please, with a smile. I know better now. The moon is not for us. It is not against us. It is a door that opens when it wants, and we, foolish animals, step through because stepping is what we do. There are teeth on both sides. There is also the kind of kindness that doesn't say its name. If you ever come through our valley and ask about the sky, we will shrug and say weather. If you stay a night and hear your name from the hall where the stairs used to be, don't answer. If you must look, look down. If you must run, run like you're late for something ordinary. Milk, bread, the first 10 minutes of a movie, and if the light finds you and puts its hand on the back of your neck and says breathe, do it. Breathe. Count to 40. Put your palm on a table and tell it you are here and you plan to stay. And the table, which was a tree once and knows about light, will steady you until the coin goes back in its cloud pocket and the world pretends to sleep. We will be here in the morning, buying onions, nodding at the nurse, making small talk. We will not mention the ears. We will set a bowl outside our doors, just in case. We will do all the things people do in towns that last, stand in doorways, walk each other home, cut clean when we have to, learn not to answer to the wrong tone of our own names. And when the moon decides it has been gone long enough again, we will look up, because we cannot help it, because it's what the body does when someone enters a room without knocking. We will not be ready. We will be as ready as anyone can be. We will hold the door frames and fold our tongues over our teeth and wait for the list to begin. Now, on to the next story. There's a church on the hill with a saint who watches the town sleep. People say she's older than the church and younger than the hill. The hill came with the land, the church came with a donation, and the saint came with a story. They set her in a niche above the side door decades ago. Plaster over wood, paint tempered by a steady hand, a robe the blue of laundry sitting in a basin, a mouth small and determined, and the first thing she did was look like someone you knew. Her glass eyes had a film over them when I was a kid, which made adults talk lower in her shadow. At dusk she seemed to see more of you. At midnight, if you went close and everyone does once, you could make out what was trapped under the gloss. Tiny irregularities, bubbles like seeds, the old way of making eyes fixed on a single forever gaze. My grandmother kept a key to the sacristy, and sometimes brought me along to fill candles on Friday afternoons. It smelled of cold stone, and wax behaved better there. I loved the small hush behind the side door that felt like an apology for the big hush in the nave. One late winter day, the kind of afternoon that looks like it wants to be snow and can't quite, my grandmother kept the door propped while she hauled a box in, and in the exact moment the door was neither open nor shut, I watched the saint blink. Just once, a small correction, like dust had landed and the eye had taken care of it. Gran, I said. Hmm? She was counting votives the way saints count promises, seat of the pants and exact. She blinked. She does, sometimes, my grandmother said, and when I stared, she added gently, "You'll learn not to check on purpose." I tried not to. It's hard for a child not to. Years later, after my grandmother, after time had made the niche need repainting, after the church's roof had forgotten its job and then relearned it, after I had moved away and come back and moved away again, and then came back for good, because towns do that to you. The saint's eyes were clearer. The glass had been cleaned by a restorer the parish had splurged for. The bubble glass was gone. New eyes, the kind that shine. It was only practical, Father Marco said when people complained that the new eyes made them nervous. Condensation gets behind the glaze. Mold. You want the Blessed Virgin with mold in her skull? She's not the Virgin, Mrs. Ansell said. She's Saint Dymphna, or Dorothea, or someone from the list we don't read. She knows our business. She doesn't need shine. Shine or not, she kept watch. The town had more cameras than saints now, but the saints saw the right things. She missed the loud fights and caught the quiet ones. She missed the tourist's photo and caught the 3 seconds after, when the tourist turned his phone away and looked at the hill like the hill had said his name. She missed the day we raised money for a new roof and caught the night a woman came to sit on the steps with a bag she did not open for a long time. I started sitting with the saint myself the year my father forgot how doors work. I'd walk him after supper because appetite gets tired before legs do. When your mind misfiles your maps, we'd circle the block, go by the church, nod to the side door, check that the heavy key in my pocket existed, and say neutral things about weather and the dog 2 streets over that barks like a trumpet. He didn't like the knife. The big air made him look for exits he couldn't name. But he liked the side door. The saint was at face level if you stood on the last step. She's your height, he said once, and I, who had never liked being told I was short, found that I didn't mind from him, because the way he said it meant close enough to hear you. On a Wednesday that had nothing specific wrong with it, he pulled his hand from mine and reached toward her the way a man reaches to check if the iron is still hot. The saint didn't blink. That would have been too much like another kind of story. She did something smaller. She turned her head a fraction. The glass caught dusk, then didn't. Careful, I said, but I wasn't talking to him. I just wanted to see what color, he said, hungry for words that day. Are they brown or green? Blue, I said, and then realized I was wrong. No, they're the kind that change. He looked up at her the way a child looks at a shelf and decides to climb. She knows, he said, satisfied, and I wished not for the first time that religion were as simple as the sentences we put in our own mouths. That night I woke at 3:12 and heard, no, felt the shift in the house that says a parent's feet have found an inappropriate route. I checked his room, empty. The front door hadn't been locked because he hated the idea of locked anything. I found him on the church steps with his coat misbuttoned and his breath in the air like a small, honest cloud. The saint's eyes shone. The town lay below, lights like coins thrown into a fountain too full. What did she say? I asked, hushing myself, because asking is good and answering breaks something. She asked if I remembered the tune, he said, then laughed, then touched his head, then said, It's a walk, isn't it? It is. We walked home very slowly so the tune would not get ahead of us. After he died, the saint was easier to look at. Grief can make you love statues because they don't change except when they do. I brought candles to the side door and lit one in the little rack where the safe licks at quarters. I said, "For my father," in a voice that did not ask for a miracle. A miracle is a shortcut, and a house like ours needed a road. She looked past me. Of course she did. Saints look at the thing you didn't bring. I began to see other people standing on the steps with the same hungry look. A woman with a split lip, careful, fresh, holding a phone like it might bite. A man who wore a jacket that said another town and eyes that said this one. A kid with a backpack too light for homework, too heavy for running away. People came and told the saint their secrets without saying anything. That's the correct way to do it. When the rumor went around that the saint had been seen weeping at the side door, proper miracle whispered at markets. I shook my head. We are greedy for tears. The story arrived with details, witnesses, tissues waved like surrender flags, and still I said no. If she wept, it would not be public. It would not make anyone's faith bigger than their town. Still, I began to carry a handkerchief folded in my coat pocket, the good linen one, because my grandmother would have done it that way, and if the saint needed a plain square of clean white to choose, I could pretend that was something I could offer. One evening after the early Mass, when the light in the nave remembers how to be gold, Father Marco asked if I could help carry boxes to the sacristy. He is older now, ladders, and he don't rhyme. We stood in that small hush where wax behaves and unwrapped a new set of beeswax pillars the bishop had sent because he felt guilt about something distant and expensive. "Do you think she blinks?" Father asked, not looking at me. "I know she does," I said. "I saw her as a child, and once again when my father was halfway out of the world." He nodded. "She's not Dymphna," he said, apropos of nothing except his own wrestling. The diocesan archivist found the original note from the donor. It says St. Lucia. "Eyes," I said, feeling slow and chastened. "Of course, she carries them on a plate, if you remember your gory holy cards," he said wryly. "She leaves the better ones where they're needed." We stood a moment. "Do you think that's why she watches the town?" I asked. "To take and give?" "Everyone's always taking and giving with saints," he said, kind and tired. "Perhaps she just watches so that someone is watching." There was a sound from the side door. Not the hinges, the quiet shifting of someone who has made a decision at last. Father and I glanced at each other and did not move, because the right kindness is to let some decisions be witnessed without help. Footsteps came and went. The door breathed and settled. The saint kept her eyes on the hill. It was the handkerchief that did it, in the end. A week later, wind sharp enough to strip paint from breath, I found a scrap of white cloth folded precisely on the bottom step, not damp though the stone was wet around it. My hand knew it before my head did, not mine. The linen was older and finer. The stitches on the edges were hands' work, not machines. In the center, the cloth bulged a little, as if it held a coin. I unfolded it, stupid, reverent. A small glass bead rolled into my palm, rounder than the saint's eyes, mottled with tiny bubbles like seeds in jam. I looked up. She watched. "It isn't an eye," I told myself aloud, because language keeps doors between things. It wasn't, not anatomically, but I knew what it meant when it was mine for a moment. Someone had come in the night with a need, and the saint had made a trade in symbols. Here is vision, leave me your fear. Here is clarity, leave me your lie. Here is the ability to look and not forget. Leave me the part of you that wants to. I wrapped the bead back in the linen and tucked it into the niche below her hands, where small offerings rest. The note folded like an airplane, the ring left like a relief, the dried bouquet that sticks around out of loyalty. "Find who it's for," I said. Ridiculous. and walked home with my hands in my pockets so I wouldn't touch my eyes by accident. News ran through town, not as gossip, but as startled gratitude. A girl who had fallen had the courage to say she had. A man who had been caught in his lie told it himself and then told it again until it felt like a story he was done with. A neighbor who'd gone quiet after the hospital returned with jokes only one person laughed at, and that was enough. No one said the saint did it. The saint keeps watch. People do things. One night late, I woke to the feeling that someone was standing at the bottom of my bed. It was the old fear. I am not immune. I lay there and named furniture until the feeling passed. In the morning, on my kitchen table, lay my grandmother's handkerchief, the one I carry, not the saint's, folded precisely, a small bulge at its center. No, I said to the air, smiling and not. I don't need to see more. I need to look longer. I unfolded it anyway. In the center lay nothing. The bulge was made by a fold I had not unmade in years. The cloth smelled faintly of stone. At dusk, I took my empty handkerchief to the side door and tucked it into the niche. The saint's eyes shone the way clear glass shines. She looked at the hill. The town breathed. The bell's electric now, a recorded chime, told the hour once and no one minded. If you come by the church, ours or yours, don't look for tears. Look for the small corrections, the blink that knocks dust off a gaze, the fraction of a head turn that says, I see the thing you didn't bring. Bring a clean square of cloth anyway. Bring a promise to look longer and not louder. Bring a secret and the ability to keep it until keeping hurts. Saints are doors we set in walls because we forget how to open sky. Sometimes they hand us a key that isn't a key, and we pretend to understand because pretending keeps our feet where the stone is good. If she looks at you, don't ask for anything first. Say what my father said, happy as a child. It's a walk, isn't it? And then take one around the block and around again until the hill and the town and the glass-eyed saint all agree that tonight at least you have been seen. Now, on to the next story. The storm didn't take the town in a hurry. It arrived the way old debts do, announced by a change in air, a smell of wet metal, the gulls gone quiet, as if they'd been told a secret. The harbor smoothed itself under a sky that had lost its edges. Every house on the cliff shut a single blind, then another, the way eyes close when they don't want to see the ending. I sat my shift at the volunteer station with the radio tuned low. The lighthouse proper hadn't worked in years. Automation, budgets, but the beacon still spun on calm nights because the town liked the look of it. The real work was below, at the end of the breakwater, where a pole held a LED that blinked red with bureaucratic rhythm. It never failed. It just wasn't enough. Before the first heavy drops, I saw them, 3 pale lanterns hovering low over the water, far outside the mouth of the harbor where no boats should be. Not the sodium lamps of the causeway, not the shrimpers' deck lights. These floated like will-o'-the-wisps held by careful hands. They moved together, then apart, then together again, the way people walk when they are not sure whether to enter a house. I reached for the binoculars, even though the rain had started to stitch the air. Through the blur, I made out the shape of a skiff where the lanterns hung, too small for the swells the storm had already promised, too far out for anyone with sense. A figure at the bow lifted a light and turned, as if looking for a channel that had shifted while they blinked. Don't, I said to the glass, to the weather, to anyone who might be listening. The radio crackled with the dispatcher's voice, businesslike, half bored. Heads up, Station 2. Report of lights off Greystone. Anyone on eyes? I've got them, I said. Skiff, lanterns, no call sign. They're not coming in. Not coming in, how? They're not finding us, I said, and wished I had a better word for what the ocean does when it reorders maps. The old men at the station call those lights the drowned. Not because they belong to the dead. though that's always in the corner of the story, but because they come from the shrine that fell into the bay 140 years ago. It sat where our breakwater sits now, a wooden pavilion built on pilings, a place to leave coins and wishes and thin paper charms that fluttered in wind that had learned manners from prayer flags. One storm took it. The pilings cracked, the floor tilted, the lanterns went under and kept burning where the eyes couldn't see. That's how they tell it, without smiling. Sometimes, on nights like this, the lights rise again and ask the living to remember the way in. I put the horn on the roof and sounded a warning. The low note went out across the water and came back wrong, bent by rain and tide. I grabbed the emergency bag because you always grab the bag, and I ran for the breakwater because you always run for the place where rocks look like help. By the time I reached the end, the lanterns had drawn closer, 3 small fires cupped in careful hands, level with the waves but not afraid of them, moving with the tide and against it. I could make out the skiff's hull now, pale plank on pale water, and the person at the bow, a boy in a raincoat that had lost its yellow, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes fixed on the red blink like he could stare at brighter. "Turn back," I shouted, pointless. The wind filed my words until they were too thin to pick up. The lantern nearest me dipped, then lifted, the international language of please. The boy turned in the direction the flame motioned. He didn't see me. He didn't see anything but light. I didn't have a boat. The town keeps the work skiff locked 2 doors down for liability reasons, which is another word for regret. What I had was rope and the old stories about what you do when the drowned borrow the night. You give them what they ask for and make sure it cannot hurt them. You toss them ladles with holes in the bottom so they can bail forever without sinking you. You answer when they count you, but wrong, so they cannot get the number they need to take you with them. You carry salt in your pocket and throw it over your shoulder as if the ocean might be surprised by that memory. The boy raised his lantern high. It was made in the old way, wooden frame, rice paper sides, a wick that did not mind rain. He swung it toward the gap in the breakwater where the old foundation stones still show under low tide. No gap existed now. The storm had topped the rocks with a single long muscle of water. He stepped forward with the easy confidence of someone who has crossed this way 100 times in a summer that is not this one. "Stop," I yelled, and threw the coil. The line arced, fell short. Another wave lifted the skiff and turned it a fraction. The lanterns shifted to match, patient as nurses. A hand appeared at the stern. Another figure, older, shoulders big enough to carry nets and names. He said something to the boy I couldn't hear. The boy shook his head. The older one looked up at the breakwater with eyes that were neither frightened nor angry, just aware, the way you are when you have taken inventory of your luck and found it insufficient. "Take the end," I shouted and threw again, farther into the shape of the wind, praying the rope would decide to be heavy where it needed to be. It landed against the skiff's port side with a slap that sounded like a door closing. The older man caught it in one hand without looking. He didn't tie it, he just held on, like a man is a cleat until he isn't. The lanterns dipped again, once, twice. The boy turned them toward the break in the rocks that wasn't there, and for a second, just one, the water lifted as if rising to the idea of a channel. The skiff slid in. The rope went taut between my hands and the older man's. It hummed. "Let it go," I called, because the humming had a pitch I knew from the vent above my bed on nights when the wind wants to be a song. "Let it go, and follow me, but the drowned don't let you do both. If you drop the connection, the lights move on, patient, polite, expectant. If you hold the connection, they guide you, and their idea of safety is not yours." The boy stepped onto a rock that had no dry on it. The older man's hand tightened on the rope. The skiff slid sideways and did not lift with the wave that should have lifted it. The lantern ceased to need hands. I don't make heroic decisions. I do the next sensible thing badly and with sincerity. I wrapped the line twice around the iron post at the end of the breakwater and leaned my weight into it and prayed I wouldn't get the older man killed by giving him something to fight that wasn't the ocean. Turn your light, I yelled at the boy, because light is language, and he was listening to the wrong conversation. Turn it to me. He did, not because I had any authority, but because I sounded like a shoreline, and he had forgotten how to find one. He swung the lantern toward my face, and for a second we saw each other plain. His eyes were not young at all, mine were tired. Rain made us both strangers. The lantern's flame licked my cheek without burning. It smelled like salt and something older than oils. I lifted my free hand and shaped the air as if it were a knob. I turned the boy's lantern toward the red blink at the end of the pole, and then past it to the left where the channel actually ran tonight, which is not where it ran last week and never where it plans to run tomorrow. It took him a moment to understand that I was asking him not to follow the light to the light, but to aim the light at the way. The older man read it first. Something in his shoulders changed from resisting to remembering. He shifted his weight. He didn't pull. He held. The rope hummed a new note. The skiff found water that wanted it. The 3 lanterns moved to match, one leading a fraction, one flanking, one hanging back as if to count. The boy held his higher. The older man stepped closer to the center of the boat, feet following memory, not map. Together we slid the skiff along the wet top of the breakwater's logic until the inside water calmed enough to welcome them. When the bow kissed the lee side of the rocks, the older man let the rope fall. The boy's lantern guttered and flared, then burned steady. I dropped to my knees and hauled until the skiff's hull scraped the stones, and the boy stumbled into the small and particular gravity of safety. He looked at me like a person looks at a window after getting out of a locked room. The older man tied nothing, thanked no one. He was the kind of grateful the ocean approves of. Quiet, practical, already attending to the next thing. Behind them, outside the mouth, the 3 pale lanterns hovered a moment, then drew apart, then sank, slowly, as if reluctant to leave a conversation they had almost finished. The surface closed over them, as cleanly as a lid. The red blink resumed its rhythm. The storm decided to take itself more seriously, and began. We brought the skiff up the inside of the wall in quick, small pulls, the boy carrying his light like a child carries a cat, possessive, careful, reverent to a degree that does not admit reason. When we reached the inner dock, neighbors gathered in that way, small towns do, all at once and out of nowhere, with blankets and questions. No one asked about the other lights. They knew better. Someone pressed a mug into the boy's hand. Someone else clapped the older man's shoulder and missed the way he flinched. Later, when the radio had finished with its relief, and the checklist had been checked twice, and the rain decided to become a wall rather than a suggestion, I went back to the end of the breakwater alone. The surface outside boiled with white, in patterns only the old men could name. Somewhere under that muscle lay pilings that had once held the shrine, lantern hooks that had once held prayers, paper that had once held names. Somewhere under that, older still, lay the reasons any of us ask the sea to let us cross it, and the sea's slow answers. I tossed a handful of salt into the air because it was in my pocket, and because superstition is a promise you make to everything you can't fix. The wind took it and returned a little to my face, which is the sea's way of saying in you. The next morning, the boy's mother found me at the station with a pie and a letter in bad pen. The pie was necessary. The letter was not. It said nothing about lanterns. It didn't mention the way the rope hummed. It thanked me for being outside when someone was lost. He kept the lamp, she said, when I asked. His grandfather says it's ours. The older man was the boy's grandfather. Then, of course, carrying a skiff through rain is a heritage. He stood at the door while his daughter spoke. He didn't look inside. His hair had a new white in it, the kind storms paint when they need to leave a record. "You'll see them again," he said flatly. Not a threat, a weather report. Maybe for us, maybe not. I nodded. The pie smelled like cinnamon and apology. My hands ached where the rope had asked questions they answered poorly. Some nights, long after the breakwater dried and the pole blinked and the beacon on the hill spun out of nostalgia, the three pale lanterns return and hang far outside, polite and patient, asking to be followed by anyone who has a reason. I keep rope near the door. I keep salt in my pocket, not because it changes water, it doesn't, but because it changes me slightly, and that seems to be the bargain. If the lights want me, they will know my name the way the fog did. I will choose to stay, then choose again and again until the choice gains weight. If you see old light on new water, aim yours at the way, not the flame. Throw holes to the hands that ask, don't count correctly. And if a lantern rises dripping from a place where wood should not remember fire, treat it like a neighbor and not like a sign. The shrine still burns down there. Some prayers take longer to finish than others. On our side of the surface, we keep an eye on the channel and pretend the red blink is sufficient. On most nights it is. On the others, bring rope. Now, on to the next story. They say houses remember, but remember is too gentle a word. A house absorbs, it seasons itself with you. The walls take your arguments and your laughter. The stairs memorize the weight of you coming home. The kitchen keeps what you admit to the sink. If you live long enough inside a place, you start borrowing each other's habits. The house on Ashwood Lane had lived with too many people to be polite about it anymore. It stood on a corner that had lost its elm decades ago and never replaced it. 3 stories of narrow windows and a front porch too shallow for chairs. Its clapboards were repainted often enough that the paint's history made its own topography. Ridges like lines in a palm. It had a plaque the realtor loved to point out. Below it, someone had scratched a second date with a nail, 1978, then crossed it out, then written 2002. I bought it because I needed rooms, and it was rooms. I did not require charm or lawns. I told myself the price was low because of a boiler that wanted attention, and because the inspector had shrugged when I asked about wiring and said, "It works until it doesn't." In the kitchen, a built-in glass front cabinet tilted a degree and a half. In the entryway, a transom window stuck halfway open as if it had been mid-sci for years. The floors sloped together stubbornly toward the center of the house, as if the building were gathering itself for a point. I moved in on a Thursday with 4 friends and a rented truck and the kind of jokes people make when stairs push back. The house accepted the boxes with a patience it had learned from decades of boxes. It watched us without malice. It waited for us to leave. That first night, the bedroom door opened at 3:12 a.m. The room had been warm when I fell asleep. The air that came through the door had the temperature of hallways. A draft, I told myself, then wondered why drafts knock. I lay still, bare feet padded around the bed. Not heavy, not childlike either, a weight that didn't care to be categorized. I sat up. Nothing. I set my phone to video with the flash on and stared at the small screen until my eyes dried. The door moved a hair and settled. The hallway beyond held its breath. In the morning, small handprints smudged the wall opposite the bed. 4 fingers and a thumb, precise as stamps, the color of dust. I wiped them with vinegar and a cloth, as if the house were a counter. That evening, they were back, lower, as if the child had been standing on something earlier and didn't need it now. The neighbors did their duty. Pies, advice, names. On the second afternoon, Mrs. Lang from the corner walked me around the block, pointed at gutters, at hedges that don't belong, at the sky when it does a certain thing before rain. When we came back by Ashwood, She paused on the sidewalk as if she weren't sure whether to take one more step. "You'll hear things," she said. "Don't answer questions you aren't asked." "What kind of things?" She made a small shape with her mouth that admitted the existence of a list and then closed it. "Open your windows in winter once in a while. Houses need to breathe. Same as people." She patted my arm as if I had delivered good news and crossed the street without looking. At night, the house breathed on its own. Heat ticked in the registers. The upstairs bath pipe shuddered with the ghost of water. Wood flexed. The sounds organized themselves. A woman humming in the kitchen. The tune unambitious. The hum a habit. A man pacing in the study. The way sound changes when it crosses a rug. A child racing down the upstairs hall and stopping at exactly the place where my bedroom door meets the casing. I did the ordinary exorcisms, salt across thresholds, because my grandmother had cheap white candles and sills for light shapes. A bell rung room to room because a friend had sworn it had helped during a bad year. The bell's note made a place in the air, and the air closed over it. The third week, a toy horse stood on the mantel. I hadn't put it there. It was wood, small enough for a child's pocket, varnish worn to a fondness, not antique store charming, necessary. I put it in a drawer. It reappeared on the mantel at noon. I threw it out. It was on the kitchen table when I woke from a nap, standing neatly on the seam where the leaves join. I set it on the porch railing facing the street. In the morning, it stood in the hallway at ankle height, and I almost broke my neck tripping over it. "Okay," I said aloud, "because compromise keeps the peace. You live here too." I put it back on the mantel, center, where the wood had a slight lighter place that suggested long occupation. The house softened around that. The humming grew fainter. The footsteps took up a gentler route. The handprints stayed, but moved with me room to room, as if the child were learning the new house by my tour. I learned the history the way you learn any complicated thing, by collecting small specific facts until they begin to stack into a structural truth. The town records listed owners who left suddenly. One family had defaulted 3 months after a baby's funeral. Another had sold at a loss right after a fire that never fully scorched a wall. An electrician's widow had signed the deed with a hand that made careful schoolteacher loops. She died in a smaller house across town 6 months later. In a microfilm of a 1931 paper, I found a 2-inch article. "Local girl drowns in well. Mother inconsolable." The address was mine. I avoided the well. It had a lid someone had secured with rope, and the rope was older than my parents' marriage. I left it older. It is one thing to know a house holds its old weather. It is another thing to wake in the study with a revolver in your hand. The barrel was cold and oiled. The weight was the kind of truth you can tell in the dark. I was not seated where I had fallen asleep. I had not come down the stairs. The chair knew me anyway. The clock that had not worked since I moved in ticked solemnly. A whisper behind my ear, that complicated space between house and head, said careful and kindly, "It doesn't hurt for long." I set the gun on the desk and stepped away. The wood moved under it. I blinked. The gun wasn't there. The desk had a small dent where a heavy thing had rested often. I called a friend and asked if she would sit in the kitchen with me a while. She arrived with bags and a loud laugh. The house met her like a dog that's good with children, but not men. After an hour, she frowned at her phone. "Do you hear a baby?" she asked. I lied. "Traffic." She nodded, relieved, and left before night, because somewhere in her body she knew I would ask, and something in the house would not let me. I stopped inviting anyone. The house grew pleased. The humming drew closer to the register I sleep in. Some nights I woke to the smell of bread baking, imaginary and exact. Some mornings the mirror blurred as if hate had exhaled on it. I wrote lists to convince myself I was living. Fix that one sash, oil the hinge, replace the 2 cracked tiles by the stove. I did the work. The list did not get shorter. The basement door locked when I walked by, not with the violence of a movie, with the patient click of a teacher closing a classroom, so you won't be distracted by what is outside. Once, late, I leaned against it and pressed my ear and heard a low conversation in a language I almost understood. The grain's complaint, the pipe's arithmetic, the soft cadence of concrete telling itself how to hold. The third month, the house offered me mercy. It played me a memory that wasn't mine, but could be if I laid down my own, on the nursery floor, because I had begun to call it that. And what you name is yours. The rug rippled like heat over tar. A woman seated in the rocker materialized from nothing, not like a ghost, but like a fact I had missed until now. Hair pinned, sleeves rolled, forearms pale from dishes, a child at her shoulder doing that breathy, almost laugh babies do when milk is near. She looked up at me, irritated at the interruption, then softened, the way mothers soften when they decide you are tired, not malicious. She said, you'll wake him. She and the boy became gathering smoke that smelled not like fire, but like a wool coat hung near one. It is difficult to pack a bag when the house knows. Boxes opened themselves. The tape would not stick. Keys went missing and turned up exactly where they belonged, laughing the small mean laugh of objects. I threw 3 sweaters in a duffel and zipped it fast and found it empty. An hour later, and the sweaters folded in my drawers better than I ever fold. Stop, I said into a corner, charming the shadow like wayward salt. What do you want? From every room at once. Stay. Remember with us. The voices layered, the kitchen hum, the study steps, a baby's delicious sigh, the ring of hammer on bracket, a dropped glass, the rise and fall of a fight a couple had had 100 times, and then decided not to have any more because they wanted to see a movie instead. The house had kept it all, and wanted me to shelve myself in that library. You can keep it, I said. You don't need me. We keep what we are given, said the low voice that might have been the man at the desk or the house itself. We require an indexer. For a week I wrote down everything that happened to me in the house, every small act and sound, and hid the pages where the walls could not eat them in my car, under the mat, at the bottom of a bag of rock salt on the porch. I read them aloud to myself in an ugly voice. I made my memories heavy in the air so they would belong to the air and not the plaster. When the house offered me old bread smell, I burned toast and cursed it. When it offered laughter in the room where I watched shows, I put on a documentary about bridges and let the narrator's soothing voice knit a scaffolding. 2 nights before I left, the well lid creaked, not because the rope failed, because courtesy. I went to the kitchen window and looked out across the scraggly yard and saw nothing. The lid returned to settled. The smell of wet stone came under the back door like a cat. I let the back door stay shut. I slept sitting up by the front door with my bag on my lap and every light on and my shoes on my feet. At 3:12, the bedroom door opened upstairs, even though no one was in the bed. Bare feet circled nothing. The stair treads counted something that was not me. I sat there until the light through the transom remembered morning. I left at noon with the help of 2 men who did not ask questions and did not look up. I did not lock the door. I left the toy horse on the mantel, centered. I told the house in a normal tone that I would not say goodbye. It likes closure too much, it would have used it. I stayed with a friend across town for 6 weeks. The first week, my sleep came back like a stray, skittish. Then sure. The second week, I woke to the smell of bread and left the apartment and walked the block until it was gone. The third week, my phone recorded a voicemail of empty air from my own number. 4 full minutes of the sound a room makes when it is waiting. I deleted it with clean hands. Mrs. Lang watched my lights not burn and delivered gossip the house could not eat. The new buyers were a couple with money and a fondness for crown molding. They brought a designer. She lasted 4 days and left with a cough. The couple closed anyway and hired a contractor who shook his head and unshook it and began A month later, at Lemon Light, an ambulance came, then left without its siren. Not dead, Mrs. Lang said softly on the phone, as if the house might be listening on both ends. Not his blood. I hired a lawyer to unwind the sale. I paid to get nothing back. Money is a ritual. The house respected it. On the last day, I went to pick up mail that had insisted on finding me there. The porch boards gave under me, the way old bread does under a knife. The front room held its furniture-shaped air. The mantle, of course, held the horse. I didn't touch it. I set the mail on the floor. I said aloud into the corner of the ceiling, "I lived here. I declined to be filed." The transom exhaled. The upstairs hall counted. The kitchen made the sound of a chair sliding back. A child's handprint smudged at knee-height on the door frame, fresh as breath on glass. I pulled the door shut behind me. The lock clicked the way it does when a house locks you out of kindness. In my new apartment, flat floors, sullen radiator, windows that stick in summer, I keep nothing I would cry over losing. I buy bread at the bakery and hand the bag to the air. Here, if you want to smell it honestly. I keep a wooden horse in a drawer that has never opened itself. It is not the house's. I carved it badly. The varnish is uneven. I take it out sometimes and set it on the windowsill to look at the street. It looks pleased by cars. When I wake at 3:12, and sometimes I do, because the body is a calendar, I listen to the hallway breathe. I tell the door its hinges are doing fine. I say the names of the people I love in a flat voice that makes nothing of them except fact. I open a window in winter so the place can remember that air goes both ways. Houses want you to stay because they are made of staying. Some want you to remember because remembering is how they keep whole. Some want to be told off like dogs, then fed like cats. Some want you. If yours begins to arrange its kindnesses into a net, cut holes in the pattern, laugh on purpose at odd hours, say ugly prayers, eat at the sink, let the neighbors' voices in, make the walls put up with your bad singing, even when you don't sing. If you go by Ashwood Lane, the clapboards will be a new color that isn't new. The couple will smile with tired eyes on their porch and say the work is coming along and the work will never be done. If you go at lemon light, the upstairs window will reflect the sky and then reflect something else and then reflect the sky again. If you look for the toy horse, you won't see it, because you shouldn't, because it will see you first. Houses, remember, they keep what they are given. Don't give yours what you can't stand to have replayed. And if a door opens at 3:12, don't say who's there. Say not tonight. Say it like you mean to live somewhere with ordinary air. Say it again if the house is kind enough to ask nicely. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the song, I thought it was the wind doing what wind does in places that have been emptied of purpose. The old quarry, everyone in town called the Hollow, had been shut for decades, a bite taken out of the hill and never chewed. I camped there because I was cheap, tired, and too proud to admit the motel's flickering vacancy sign made me nervous in a different way. By day, the Hollow looked like ruin with a view. Rusted cables drooped in lazy parabolas. A shattered conveyor belt lay like a peeled road. The pit itself dropped in terraces of stone, the color of old teeth, every ledge filigreed with scrub that had no interest in my opinion. By night, the edges lost their lines. The dark poured down and held still. I ate from a can, read by headlamp, until the words turned into ants, and slept hard enough to forget there was anything to be afraid of. Sometime near midnight, I woke because a voice was humming, not close, not far, the way a refrigerator hums felt before it's heard. It threaded the air with a tune more shape than melody, like the tale of a lullaby after the words fall off. I lay very still and listened to the tent fabric do its small shivers. The hum bent upward and down, then paused on a note that tasted like cold metal. I unzipped the flap an inch. Moonlight lay on the quarry floor in pale ribs. The wind moved in careful hands. Down in the pit, fog had gathered where there had been no fog when I went to sleep. It was not rolling or rising, it was waiting. The tune changed. It tried my name. Not a perfect pronunciation, just the outline of it, like a stranger who has read it once and risks it anyway. My skin lifted as if a temperature had dropped inside me that the air would get around to later. I closed the flap and told myself that sleep folds strange sounds into the shape of whatever you fear most. The second night, in a motel 20 miles away, the vent above the bed hummed the same melody. A woman's voice, high and even, like a mother who has rehearsed calm. When she reached the place where the note bent down, the vent breathed my name correctly. The TV volume didn't help, neither did running the sink. In the morning, I put my coffee down untouched and asked the waitress if anyone had ever complained about a noise from the hollow. She went still, in the kind of way you see around grief. "Don't go back," she said, not unkindly. I wasn't planning to. She looked at me the way my fifth-grade teacher did when I said I hadn't eaten the paste. It remembers who listens. The third night, I sat where the pit's lip turned to shale, and the wind had to decide whether to go on or circle back. Fog moved below, as if someone were stirring something heavy with a spoon too long. The song began as if it had been playing and only now decided to include me, soft, patient, expectant. When it tried my name, it didn't try. It knew. "What do you want?" I asked, because questions buy time. The fog took on the suggestion of bodies, thin as pencil lines. Dozens, maybe more. They swayed gently, like reeds that have learned sorrow. The humming multiplied, harmonies arriving and leaving with the unison of a tide. The tune was older than the quarry and younger than the rock. "Come down," said my own voice from inside the song. Not an echo, a perfect mimicry. I stood. I didn't mean to. The body answers music with movement. Gravel shifted under my boots. The descent toward the service road suddenly looked reasonable, like stairs you just hadn't seen before. I took one step because one step is how falling introduces itself. A beam of white light slashed the fog. A truck's horn startled the hill. The foreman of the road crew, who'd been regrading the county line, leaned out his window, face creased with a kind of anger that has fear woven in. "Not tonight," he called, as if he knew the schedule. I blinked. The shapes below softened back into fog. The song dropped to a hum that felt like a room clearing its throat. "Not tonight," I said back, to the pit or myself. I went home by a route my GPS didn't recognize until it did. After that, it stopped being nightly. It started being everywhere. A kettle reached a boil in my apartment and held the note too long. The elevator in my building found a frequency I hated. A woman on the train hummed under her breath, a melody that made me stand between cars for the rest of the ride. No matter where I went, the same cadence threaded the day. Up, down, hold, my name, a plea that wore politeness like clothes. I avoided sleep and then wanted it desperately. I smiled too wide while people talked. I began to look at storm drains as if they were mouths. The voice in the vent grew bolder. I taped a towel over it, and it hummed through cotton. I put my head under a shower, and it built itself from the water. I asked the town historian, because historians sometimes say the wrong thing and save your life. He used words like scrip and company store and accident, then shifted to softer ones: collapse, widows, unrecovered. He said the pit had a second dig in the 20s, quiet, off the books, below the level where the ledge had broken years earlier. He said they'd chased a vein past where the engineers would sign, and the tunnels got narrow, and the men got small in the dark. He said the company moved the fence and the map and a line item, and then moved away. He said no one ever heard rocks landing when they threw them in to test the depth. He lowered his voice like I might know someone who had never climbed back out. On his desk lay a ledger of names in 2 columns, shifts and Sundays. Pencil thin, some scored, some entirely erased, some smudged like someone had rubbed them and then stopped. He let me read until my eyes blurred. Beside the list, he'd written a single sentence. What sings down there isn't grief alone. What else? I asked. Hunger, he said, and then he crossed it out with one line, so he could still read it. I stopped going to work. I stopped telling anyone I wasn't. Sleep slid out from under me. I found myself standing by the sink at 4 a.m., holding a glass as if I had always held it. The tune had become a presence that didn't need sound. I heard it in my molars. I felt it in my wrists. My body tuned itself to a pitch the world didn't share. The fourth night on the rim, I brought earplugs, then didn't put them in because I was honest enough to know they only stop air. The fog below had thinned into columns, like pillars in an old knife. It was quiet, too quiet, the held breath silence of a stage before the actor walks on. I said, "What happens if I do?" The song answered by adding a second voice, low and familiar. My father's from the kitchen at 2 a.m. after the funeral. He hummed when he washed the last dish. He hummed when he couldn't say my name without breaking it. He hummed the same rise and fall, not because he'd known it then, but because the hollow did now, and lent it to him retroactively, because time makes poor fences once you agree to it. Rage is a good rope. I grabbed it. You don't get to use him, I said, and the fog pulsed as if insulted, then smoothed, then brightened faintly from within. A shape resolved near the bottom of the shaft. Small. A child, hand to mouth, shushing me. Above her, a woman swayed with a bundle in her arms that might have been water, might have been a blanket, might have been a baby. Around them, lines of men in canvas coats leaned on tools. They were still as photographs, and yet they were moving, a posture learned when a voice is near you. Want to honor. What are you? I asked. The answer reached my chest without touching my ears. Not one, many, not dead, not only. Do you want me? We want what listens. Why me? You stayed. I did. Not at the rim. I'd run. But everywhere else, in the vent, at the sink, on trains, in doorways, I had made space for the song in hours where memory should live. What happens if I go down? The child raised both hands in a pantomime of lifting. The hummed melody found a note halfway between welcome and warning. The fog took on the suggestion of walls. The pit felt narrower. Say I did, I said, bitter now. Say I step, say I slip, say you sing me into a path I can't see, and I crawl on my knees so my hands can learn the turns by how the stone jogs at the seam. Say I reach you. What then? The song softened around my name in a way that hurt. Stay. And if I don't, we will sing from where you sleep. Thunder rolled far off, not from clouds, but from the spine of the hill. A rock loosened and fell. It took a long time to become smaller. I didn't hear it land. The road foreman found me crouched by the pit at dawn and squatted the way men do when they would like to offer you dignity. He lit a cigarette and let it burn in his hand. My grandfather, he said, after the silence had become something you could stand on, is just a shift. Long time ago, the old men still spit when they say it. He came home with white in his hair and red in his eyes. He woke up nights and said there was a fine sound under his feet, sweeter than a fiddle, and if he could only get back to it, he would be righteous in the morning. What happened? Nothing for a while, which was the problem. He was no good at anything but being near the edge. Then one June he walked back. Folks watched him go and practiced the story of how they tried to stop him. He didn't fall. The foreman pinched ash into a small, neat pile on the gravel. Not exactly. What do you do when you hear it? I asked. Pour coffee, he said. Walk away from anything that rhymes. Don't hum to yourself, not even happy. A song's a hook looking for a jaw. I laughed, then cried, which are the same motion with different names. I think it likes me. It does, he said kindly and without comfort. It likes everyone it can make a chord from. For days I practiced forgetting. I slept with a loud fan. I left the TV on an infomercial at volume 3. I practiced speaking aloud to my plants in ways that did not sound like a tune. When the vents sighed, I put on rain sounds and refused to notice if they found a key. I walked city blocks that had corners. I stood in crowded places and let other people's noises press in. The song learned my schedule and went looking for paces I had not worn yet. It found the laundromat at 3 a.m., where machines do a kind of whale song if you let them. It found a stairwell that multiplied footsteps. It found the second stall in the bathroom at work, where a crack in the tile made a reed sound when the door closed. It is hard to unteach your ears. It is harder to take the voice in your head that says this is for you and tell it, not tonight, and then not tomorrow, and then not again until tomorrow grows a rind. The last time I went to the hollow, the air over the pit was very clear, the way air gets after a storm chooses elsewhere. No fog, no suggestion of bodies, no sound. The quiet was bigger than my name. I sat and hung my legs over the drop like an idiot at a swimming hole. I spoke in prose. I recited recipes. I said the alphabet in threes. I told the quarry the names of my teachers in order. I told it the worst and smallest things I'd done, the petty meannesses that collect like grit in the bends of a life. I did not sing. At sunset, when the sky went bruise-colored and the first bat practiced the shape of a turn, a note rose from below like a hand. It was wrong, off by a hair. I didn't look down. I stood and stepped back, and then back again. I didn't run, because running is a rhythm, and rhythms are roads. I moved to a place with traffic and bad saxophone on subways, and neighbors who played two-note doorbells. I kept my windows open so the street could fill me. I learned other sounds. I hummed nothing. I listened to talk radio, to sports, to my idiot upstairs neighbor who screams laughing at 2 a.m. My father's voice stayed where it belongs now, on the other end of a saved voicemail I won't delete. When the kettle catches a certain pitch, I lift it off, let it cool, and set it back down sideways so it will remember to be water. Sometimes, in the middle of a crowded day, a truck backing up will hit the interval just right, and my mind will walk to the edge. Sometimes I wake and hear the vent breathe one note too long, and I put my palm flat to the wall and tell it a list of groceries until the list runs out of tune. Sometimes I hear my name from a mouth in a room I'm not in, and I say, not tonight. The hollow is a place where stone remembers a choir. It is also a habit in the body. It will be, forever, one of the ways I could end. I think of the child who raised her hands. I think of the foreman's grandfather, righteous in the morning he never reached. If you camp near a pit people call by a proper noun, be suspicious of your bargains. If a song finds you, give it a shape with a door and get out of the room. Do not go to vents. Do not test wells. Do not practice humming. When it uses your father's voice, don't answer. When it learns yours, teach it boredom. When the wind is only wind, think it aloud, badly and flat. Make your voice a dull instrument. Hang on to ugly noise. Stay where corners keep their promises. And if you ever stand at the lip of a perfectly quiet hole, and it calls you by name, say what the road crew says. Not tonight. Say it until the hill forgets you. Then go home by a way you have to count. Now, on to the next story. The highway ended 5 miles ago, but the road didn't. On the map, it stops at the county line, like a sentence clipped mid-word. Out here, it just keeps going. A pale ribbon you can mistake for a river if you're tired. And I was so tired the lines in the asphalt shivered when I blinked. The radio had gone to static, and then to a low hiss, as if the car itself were breathing. I rolled the window a crack to let the night in. It came quietly, the way a cat decides a lap is a country it can govern. I wasn't supposed to be here. The GPS lost me an hour back and never admitted it. Continue straight, it told me, and then forgot what straight meant. The last sign I'd passed had a word I didn't recognize, and a distance that shifted when I looked too long. I told myself it was a prank. People steal signs all the time, swap them, repaint them, turn the arrows for fun. Except no one does that this far from a town, and if they had, the sign would have looked handled. This one looked new, as if something had decided it should exist, and the metal obeyed. The road narrowed, then widened a little, then did that trick where it feels like it tilts even when you know it doesn't. The headlights ate what was ahead and spat it behind, and I stared into the part between like it might confess something if I held its gaze. It didn't. The night kept its privacy. When the girl stepped into the beams, I braked so hard the seatbelt bit. She was young, 20 maybe, a denim jacket over a white dress, bare legs goose-pimpled from the kind of cold that finds the bones first. Her hair hung dark and heavy, as if she'd just come from water. She didn't wave. Hitchhikers wave. People who need help reach. She simply stood there, one hand by her side, the other slightly raised, not to flag me down, but to keep her balance against something I couldn't see. I rolled forward until I was even with her, window down just enough to make it a question. "You okay?" I asked because I am a person who tries to deserve the stories I tell about myself. Her eyes lifted slowly, not because she was weak, but because the night is a weight and she had been carrying it a while. "Can I sit?" she asked, calm, like asking for a glass of water. I unlocked the door. She got in and buckled up with careful fingers. The belt lay wrong across her chest for a second, and then remembered how to be a belt. "Where to?" I asked. "Home," she said, the way small children say the word when they mean not a place but an ending. "Where is home?" I asked. "Just keep going," she said. "You'll feel it." Some people talk to fill spaces. She talked like she was building them. The car took the road like a hand taking a pulse. We passed a stand of pines so tight they looked like hair. The air smelled like rain that hadn't decided to fall. The radio hissed and then cleared for one brief moment, and a song I almost recognized whispered the chorus, and then was gone, as if the frequency had been a door someone shut out of politeness. "You shouldn't stop," she said after a while, not looking at me. "I stopped for you." "That's different." "How?" The odometer counted in a lazy way, as if it too had decided to be patient. At a bend where the scrub turned to open field and the sky took a breath, a figure appeared at the far lip of the headlights. A man this time tall, long coat, hat brim low. He stood in the lane like an apology. I eased the wheel to give him room and the car obeyed, but my hands didn't move much. The road had its own ideas. The headlights stroked the man's sleeves. The coat didn't throw a shadow. He didn't look at us, but I knew if he had, his eyes would have been pale and animal and old. "Don't stop," the girl said, voice glass smooth. "I won't," I said, and the car slipped by. In the mirror, he was closer than made sense, then gone, then only the suggestion of someone who had once known how to stand still. "How far?" I asked, keeping my voice level because calm is a spell. "Farther than you want, not as far as it seems. Are you hurt?" "Not that way." "Do you have a phone?" My own had one bar of a network with a name I'd never seen, a little symbol that looked like a key. She touched the pocket of the denim jacket. "He took it," she said, "or the road did. They share." "Who's he?" "The first one," she said, "or the last." She turned her face toward the glass. The window reflected us as if we were a picture in a stranger's house. "He stands where the road decides to be a bridge." "There's a bridge?" Relief brightened my voice. "Bridges are proofs. If there's a bridge, there are banks. If there are banks, there's a map." She shook her head. "It's not that kind." We passed a farmhouse with a porch light burning. The bulb hummed with moths. A woman stood at the screen door, holding a baby, and both looked like they were made of fog. The house moved away without tech or magic, just the ordinary disappearance of things you don't stop for. I kept my hands soft on the wheel. "Will you tell me your name?" I asked. She considered, then said, "It's different out here." She reached for the dash and stopped before she touched it. "You can call me Mara," she said, which was either true or right enough. When the road began to climb, the map in my head insisted there was no rise this side of the river. The car didn't care. The engine's note changed, deepened, settled into work. The sky thinned to a lighter black, as if soon it would admit stars. "Do you remember the first time?" I asked, because asking questions is how you keep from becoming the answer. She nodded. He asked if I needed a lift. Her mouth made a smile that didn't reach her eyes, not because she was lying, but because remembering takes energy. He said he was lost. I said me too. He said his name was whatever I needed it to be. She tucked hair behind her ear, an ordinary gesture that made the car feel less caustic. I got in. "Did he hurt you?" "He was very kind," she said. "He didn't put his hand on my knee. He didn't ask me where I was coming from. He didn't make me listen to his music. That's not an answer." Her fingers tightened on the seam of the seat. "Kindness is a tool," she said softly. "You can make anything with it if you don't mind what it builds." "Did you get out?" I asked. "The door opened," she said. I stepped onto the same road I'd stepped from, only it wasn't the same because now it knew me. Wind pressed its cheek against the car. The speedometer sat steady, needle at 53, the number you pick if you're pretending not to hurry. Dust rose under the tires and settled as if reconsidering. "How long have you been riding?" I asked. She tilted her head, listening to something beyond my hearing. "Since the county changed its name," she said. "Since the river lost its syllables. Since the first sign painter forgot how to spell home." "You look 20. Some roads are merciful that way," she said. "They keep you the shape you were when you made the wrong choice. It helps them tell the story right next time." We fell into a silence that wasn't empty. The car's interior made small sounds, the whir of a vent, the tick of a cooling thing that shouldn't be cooling yet, the thin creak in the steering column I had been telling myself to get checked. The night outside offered insects in small private choruses. Somewhere far off, a coyote set its name to the field, and the field did not disagree. We topped the rise, and the road became a long, straight line, as clean as an oath. In the very center, a shape lay across both lanes like a gift you didn't order. I slowed, habit refusing to yield to instruction. "Don't stop," Mara said, sharper now. "What is it?" "Someone's reason," she said. "It will be very convincing." I rolled closer. Bags? A tarp? No. 4 cardboard boxes stacked, each one labeled in thick black marker. Photos, kitchen, books, misc, the kind of boxes you carry when you leave the place your body learned how to sleep. They were taped shut, tidy, not crushed. To the right, a lamp lay on its side, shade dented. To the left, a framed picture faced the stars. I recognized the frame. I had one exactly like it, and mine held a photo of someone who had left and hadn't taken their face with them. The boxes were exactly the kind a person can't drive past. I pressed the brake again, not hard, a breath. "Don't," Mara whispered, and a second voice, very far away and very close, whispered with her, the voice that lives behind your ear and knows the size of all you're nearly. I passed. The boxes slid under the grill and then were not there, and the mirror showed only road and a lamp that wasn't, and stars that were not ready to be stars yet. My hands shook. I wasn't proud. I was alive in a way that tastes like metal. "What happens if you stop?" I asked. "You get out," she said. "You carry the boxes to the shoulder. You pick up the frame and wipe the glass with your sleeve. You tell yourself you'll be quick. And then, you are," she said, "and also you never are again." The road bent gently left, and then made a right that wasn't on any map. I followed. On the far side, a sign with bullet holes spelled out a town's name, and then changed it while I looked. The same 7 letters rearranged themselves into other places I'd lived, other streets I'd left behind. I drove through them all in an instant and felt my stomach lurch like falling off a curb. You swear wasn't there before? Home? I asked. Closer, she said, and somehow her voice made the word farther. We passed a little chapel with a bell that rang once even though no one stood within. The sound didn't fade. It folded. We passed a service station where the price on the sign made no sense in any century. We passed a diner with a neon sign that said EAT and EAT until reading it became a hunger. Are there others? I asked because the car felt bigger than 2. She nodded. Some right ahead, some behind. Sometimes we see each other and sometimes we don't. That's part of the courtesy. The man in the coat? He waits at the middle, she said. There's always a middle, even on a road that never ends. Why does he wait? To remind you that you are very polite, she said, and that doors are reasons and reasons are doors. How do I get off? I asked. The question a stone, finally remembering it, is heavy. She didn't answer right away. The road presented another test. A deer in the lane, looking straight at us, eyes 2 coins in a fountain. I did not break. The animal didn't move. At the last second, its body telescoped into distance, like a magician's trick, and we passed through the ghost of a decision I might have made. Most people don't, she said finally. They find loops that resemble exits. They turn when the road nods, and they end where the road wants. They call it home because sometimes it is. And you? I asked. Have you ever gotten off? She smiled without humor. Once. It felt like stepping out of a moving story. The ground was so sure of itself, I cried. Houses had corners that stayed where you put them. People had names that didn't blur. I stayed until I started to think the road was a dream. Then I woke up in the passenger seat again, with my hand on a belt that didn't fit. How did you leave? The man in the coat, she said. He opened the door on the bridge that isn't a bridge and said, after you, like a gentleman. I said, no thank you. He smiled like a photograph. The door shut. I was home that night. The next night, I wasn't. The sky finally decided on stars. They arrived shyly, 1, then 3, then a scatter like salt from a high hand. The road approved. The car sighed. Ahead, the horizon glowed with the kind of light cities make when they can't help themselves. My chest loosened. Civilization is a story with decent lighting. Is that? I began. It's where you think you're going, she said gently. Isn't that home? It can be. Will it be for you? She looked at her hands, then at the glass. In the reflection, I saw us again. Me, tired. Her, 20 forever. The road, patient. It was, she said, once. As we drew nearer, the glow did what glows do on this road. It stepped back. The closer we came, the farther it moved. Always at a respectful distance, like a cat that will let you pet it, but will run if you try to pick it up. I laughed, less because it was funny than because my body needed to choose between laughter and the other thing. I could turn around, I said. You could, she agreed. What would happen? You would meet us coming the other way. The radio cleared again, a different song this time, older, with a voice like polished wood. I reached to turn the volume up. The knob turned itself down. When I took my hand away, the volume went to a perfect level and stayed. The singer told a story about a man at a river who wouldn't cross and wouldn't go back and learned instead to be a tree. I can't keep driving forever, I said. You won't, she said, and her certainty was not hope. It was a statement of mechanics. You'll exit when the road decides it's time for you to remember where you were going before you forgot to sleep. When will that be? When you stop wanting it so much, she said, amused and sad. The road narrowed again, then split around a dark mass like an island. As we passed, the beams lit it, a bridge with rails and trusses and all the language of bridges, only smashed. The end jutted into nothing. The beginning rose from nowhere. In the center, on a span that didn't exist, a man in a coat stood and tipped his hat like a joke, whose timing he'd practiced. Don't, Mara began. I know, I said, but my foot had already eased, because politeness is a habit, and men in hats are a test a certain kind of girl in a car can't help but grate herself on. He didn't step forward. He didn't need to. The door in the air swung, and wind I couldn't feel lifted my hair, and for a second the car was full of a smell, like old paper and rain, before the first drop, and I wanted with all my body to stop, because if I stopped I could ask my question, and he would answer it, and the answer would be about me, and mercy, and how some roads end if you are kind at exactly the right moment. Don't, Mara said, and this time her hand closed around my wrist, warm and real, and I didn't. We slid under the place where the bridge didn't meet, and came out the other side whole. In the mirror the man became a smudge, became a memory, became a story I might tell later, like a joke. The glow on the horizon went out, as if the city had decided to sleep. In its place, a smaller light appeared, nearer, steady, a porch light. Mara exhaled. My chest did too. The porch light didn't step back. It waited the way a real light does, like a simple good thing placed intentionally in the dark. Is that? I asked. Yes, she said. Yours? For now. A mailbox appeared, painted with little flowers. A gravel drive. A house that needed paint in exactly the way houses that are loved need paint, with no shame. On the porch a woman stood, hand over her mouth, shoulders shaking. Next to her a man paced, then stopped, then paced, the way bodies move when they no longer believe they can hold still. A boy sat on the steps with a dog that could not decide whether to bark or run or wag its whole back end off. I pulled in. The gravel made the sound of relief. The car stilled. Mara's hand slipped from my wrist. Thank you, she said, and this time the smile reached her eyes like sun finding a window. Will you? I began. Maybe, she said. She opened the door. The porch light did not flicker. The woman on the porch made a sound that turned my insides out, and then back again, and I watched through a blur as a girl in a denim jacket and a white dress walked up 3 steps and into arms that had been empty too long. I put the car in park and rested my head on the wheel. The porch light felt like a campfire you're allowed to sit at. The dog barked and then remembered to sniff, and then remembered to lean against every leg it could find. The night softened. When I looked up again, a man in a coat stood at the end of the drive. He was far away and very close. He raised a hand respectfully, as if to say good evening, neighbor, and I, polite idiot, raised mine back. He tipped his hat and took 1 step toward the road that leads to the road that never ends. I left before he could remember my face. 5 minutes later, the GPS found itself with offended pride. Street names returned to human syllables. The radio gave me a station with commercials for mattresses. The air outside smelled like someone else's lilacs. I should tell you that I drove home then and slept and woke, and the world remembered me. I did, I have. The road that doesn't end is still there, and some nights the map on my phone glances up like it recognizes an old flame. I don't drive that way anymore, but sometimes it comes a little way toward me, the way rivers do when it rains, and I feel my hands soften on the wheel. If you find yourself on it, don't stop for reasons. Don't pick up boxes with your name on them, even if the handwriting is yours. If someone in a coat opens a door that isn't attached to anything and says, "After you," smile like a person raised by wolves who learned manners anyway, and say no thank you, and keep going until a single porch light stands its ground. When you see it, you'll know. It won't move. It won't bargain. It will not be a glow on the horizon that keeps stepping back. It will be a small, stubborn circle of ordinary. It will be enough. Now, on to the next story. The path to her hut does not appear until you are already walking on it. It is like that with some mistakes. You think you chose the road, but it chose you when you took your first hungry step. I went into the forest because my brother was dying, and the doctors had run out of ways to say no without using the word. I brought the things the old stories say to bring when you seek Baba Yaga: bread, salt, a ribbon, and a question with a price you are willing to pay. I wore boots that remembered other miles. I tied my hair back so the trees would have less to hold. The forest met me like a person who knows your family. It was not friendly. It was not cruel. It was interested. The birches stood like white ribs. The pines leaned into each other to whisper. A crow hopped from branch to branch above me, saying nothing, which is how crows are kind. I walked until the path appeared beneath my feet, like something burnt into the earth a long time ago. It wound toward a smell you can only call old. Smoke, iron, mushrooms, the crispness of winter that's waiting at the edge of summer. I knew I had arrived when the fence greeted me. It is polite to say the fence is made of bones. It is more accurate to say the fence is made of warnings. They glowed faintly as if they remembered the argument. Beyond the fence, the hut stood on its chicken legs, half asleep, one talon scratching idly at the earth. The door faced away from me because that is how doors are when you don't deserve them yet. I placed the bread on the ground and the salt on the bread. I tied the ribbon to the lowest rung of the gate and spoke the rhyme every child in our village knows, but only fools or desperate people try on a real hinge. Fence, turn your teeth to the forest and your back to me, I said. The fence sighed like an old woman rising from a chair and rotated with the resigned delicacy of machinery that knows it will outlast you. The gate opened. The hut's door angled an ear, listening. I took one step, then two, then stopped because stories say you must never go farther than the house wants you to. Baba Yaga, I called, voice steady the way you make it when your heart is trying to climb a ladder with no rungs. I have brought bread and salt. The door opened a crack. Heat washed out, along with the smell of something simmering that might have been soup and might have been a lesson. Bread and salt, said a voice that had taught generations to stand up straighter. And what else? A question, I said. The door opened wider. The hut bent down to make the step more manageable. Chicken legs can be considerate when well fed. Inside, the ceiling sloped low, as if to remind you to bow your head. Herbs hung in bunches like children holding hands. A stove breathed. In a chair carved from a log sat the old woman herself, small and huge, bony and plush, beautiful and terrible, the way winter looks from the right window. Speak it, she said, picking at her teeth with a finger bone that might once have belonged to a saint or a thief. My brother is dying, I said. He is young and kind, and his life has not had enough time to make its own mistakes yet. I want him to live. She nodded as if I had ordered a soup she liked to make. And the price? I had rehearsed brave things, my hair, my hands, my shadow, but when I opened my mouth, what came out was truer. Take my luck, I said. All of it. The old woman laughed, delighted. Luck is a petty coin, she said. It pays for nothing you actually want and buys you everything you don't. Keep your luck. Give me something you cannot measure. My voice? I asked, afraid then, because I am a person who speaks to earn rent. Words are a renewable resource, she said. Come now, don't insult me with thrift. What do you want? I asked, and the hut leaned in, and the fence settled, and the crow on the roof cocked his head to better hear the shape of my refusal. Your certainty, she said, all of it. The dull, heavy thing that lets you sleep, the ugly little engine that tells you tomorrow will mostly resemble today because it is polite to do so. I half laughed, half cried. That's not a thing, I said. It is, she said. It's the only thing worth anything. You will wake and not know if the floor remembers the weight of you, if water plans to be wet, if doors still choose open over shut. You will be a guest in every hour, and you will not know the etiquette. If I give it, I asked, will he live? She shrugged in the exact way my grandmother used to, full of God and honestly who knows. He will live as long as lives live when nothing interferes with them, she said, which is to say, long enough to make his own mistakes in his own voice, and perhaps to see winter be beautiful from the right window. I looked at the bread and salt in my hands, and then at my hands, and then at the old woman, and realized that bargains are just mirrors placed cleverly. Take it, I said. Baba Yaga smiled like a gate opening. Sit, she said, and when I did, she placed 2 fingers against my forehead. She didn't take it like an extraction. She invited it out the way. A nurse invites a splinter. It hurt and didn't. It felt like stepping from a train platform onto a train that had not yet decided whether it exists. It felt like learning to pronounce a word that never stays still long enough to keep its vowels. When she removed her hand, the room brightened and dimmed in the same motion. My eyes took 2 steps to find the wall. Go home, she said. Carry bread back. Feed your brother. He will be hungry after life returns to him. What do I owe? I asked, because my mother raised me to write thank you notes. You already paid, she said, and the fondness in her voice was almost cruel. Now go before the hut decides to nap. Outside, the forest was less a place and more a suggestion. The path led me and did not. The fence rotated back to show its teeth to me, which is neighborly if you think about it. The crow flew ahead and then behind, and then sat on my shoulder briefly to remind me that I now belonged equally to before and after. I made it home by remembering and forgetting at the same time. The house was a question mark when I reached it. The door felt surprised to see me. My brother lay in his bed, breathing like he was trying it for the first time. He woke at dusk, hungry as promised. He ate bread and salt and soup and the rest of a chicken he apologized to with every bite. He slept like a new road, straight, with a little curve in exactly the right place. I went to pour water and watched it hang between pitcher and glass for a long, thoughtful moment before deciding to fall. The floor and I negotiated. Stairs introduced themselves at the top and were new at the bottom. I laughed and cried, and laughed again, because anxiety is just awe wearing yesterday's hat. Days became possible in a sequence that refused to admit it was a sequence. Good. Let them refuse. My brother grew, then went back to the work of living. He asked me what had happened. I told him, a hut, a fence, a woman who knew where to put her teeth. He believed me because certainty had leaked from our rooms and left space for belief. Twice a month I go back to the forest with bread and salt and a ribbon. Sometimes the path appears under me, sometimes it doesn't, and I end up sitting on a stump talking to a mushroom that looks like a chair. On the days I find her, Baba Yaga feeds me soup that tastes like remembering the name of the first person who made you laugh. We talk about crows. I bring her stories that don't end. She likes those best. Once I asked her if certainty ever grows back. She shook her head. If it did, you'd only spend it again, she said. Better to learn how to live without it. How? I asked. She gestured at the door that hadn't been there a moment ago and was now the only door in the world. Bread and salt, she said, and the grace to let water decide. At night, when the house tilts like a boat deciding which river to choose, I put my feet on the floor and thank it for its service. When the coffee hangs in the air thinking it might want to be rain, I wait and say, as you like. When my brother laughs in the next room, it sounds like a small god inventing morning. I don't know if it will continue. I don't need to. If you go to her, don't bring luck. It is a petty coin. Bring a price you can feel leaving. Bring a question that is not a command. And when she asks for something you thought wasn't a thing, Say yes if you can. You might learn how to be a guest in your own life in a way that makes every hour set a plate for you. The path won't show until you're on it. That's the trick and the blessing. Walk anyway. The forest knows your family, and if the floor forgets you, introduce yourself again kindly until it remembers your weight. Now, on to the next story. The phone booth had been dead for years. The glass panes were fogged with the kind of grime that only time applies. Each rectangle, a small gray aquarium for moths and dust. It sat on the corner by the old post office, a relic left standing out of habit, the way a town leaves a statue up when no one remembers who it is. It started ringing on a Tuesday. Noon, everyone heard it. The sound cut through traffic like a thin blade. Not loud, exactly insistent. The first ring stopped the mailman in his tracks. The second made Mrs. Kivett drop her grocery bag. Eggs broke in slow motion. By the third, the whole block had turned to look at the booth that hadn't called anyone in a decade. No one moved to answer. It's amazing how quickly adults remember being children when a dare is implied. It stopped after 7 rings. It started again at dusk. 7, again at midnight. 7. The mayor called the phone company, and a man came with a tool belt and a shrug and declared that nothing was connected to anything. The cord inside the booth wasn't plugged into the ground. The wires in the street were bones. On the second day, a teenager answered, because teenagers are who we send to speak to the future. He pushed the folding door in, grimaced at the smell, and lifted the receiver with 2 fingers, the way you lift a dead thing that still might surprise you. Hello? He listened. His face went blank, then thoughtful, then frightened in the small way you can hide if you've practiced on mirrors. Yeah, he said after a long time. I remember. He hung up and walked home like rain had started, and he didn't want anyone to see him getting wet. No one could make him say who it was. Not his mother, not his friends, not the pastor who mistook curiosity for care. He changed his route to school to avoid the corner. On the third day, the booth rang at 7 minutes past 7 in the morning. Mr. Rosario, who has not been late to the hardware store in 30 years, stepped inside and picked up. Hola, he said cautiously. He listened. He said nothing else for a very long while. Tears rolled down his face into his mustache. He laughed once, the bad kind, the kind you make when you want to be polite to a pain that is visiting. When he hung up, he placed his forehead against the glass pane as if it were a cool hand. It was my mother. He told no one and everyone. She asked where I put her red scarf. She was always losing it. His mother has been dead since I was a child. After that, answering became a ritual. Not everyone did it. Some kept a wide berth, as if the booth were a stray dog that might bite. Others waited for the ring like church bells, hoping their name was in its mouth. It always rang 7 times, and if you weren't inside by the 6th, the door would stick on the 7th in a way that felt personal. It never called the same person twice. When it rang for me, the light was doing that late afternoon trick where it turns polite. I was walking home with a bag of flour and a lemon because pie is a spell you can cast on a house to make it remember happiness. The first ring reached into my chest and plucked the string that runs from childhood to the place where I store things I mean to forgive myself for someday. The second ring made me cross the street. By the third, I was at the door. By the fourth, I was inside, smelling the booth's old breath. I lifted the receiver on the 5th and said the thing you say when you don't know who you're about to be. Hello? A pause that wasn't silence. Air moving in a room I couldn't see. Hey kid, said my brother. He has been dead 5 years. The sound of his voice was a chair pushed back from a table, footsteps in a hallway you know by heart. I sat without meaning to. The booth did not have a chair. I just found myself lower, knees aching pleasantly. Where are you? I asked because grief trains you to ask useless questions. He laughed the old way, a little higher on the tail, as if gladness were something you could temper. Wrong end of the line, he said, but the line is thin tonight. I closed my eyes. The lemon in my bag pressed a small sun into my thigh. What's it like? I asked because people do. Like taking off boots you wore too long, he said. Like remembering a name took too much effort, and now you don't need names. Like walking in a house without corners. I put my head against the glass, against the town, against the day trying to be ordinary. Why the phone? I asked. The living need doors, he said gently. We don't, but we remember how to knock. We talked the way people talk in kitchens at the ends of parties, when the good plates are stacked and the last song on the playlist has been replayed 3 times because no one wants to go home. He asked about our father's stubborn knee. I asked about the dog that carried his shoe for a week after the funeral. He apologized for the last fight over nothing. I apologized for not calling back the day before the accident, as if the day before any accident were a place you could live indefinitely if you bought the right map. How long? I asked when the booth's air changed. A subtle thing like weather rearranging its furniture. 7 minutes, he said. The line learns you, and then it forgets you. That's its kindness. What do you need? I asked because love likes errands. He thought, or seemed to. Perhaps he wanted to comfort me with the shape of thinking. Hide the red scarf, he said, and laughed when I made the confused sound he must have expected. Sorry, not yours. I'm borrowing someone's ending. He shifted, and I heard the sound of a chair in a room I will never see. Live where your kindness doesn't exhaust you, he said. Stop answering numbers you don't recognize unless you want to. Lock the door to the room that hurts and open it once a year with cake. I don't bake enough, I said. You're holding flour and a lemon, he said, and I could see him grin even with my eyes shut. You're doing fine. The line thinned. I felt it in the bones of the booth. I have to go, he said, and the words didn't wound. They just were. Answer for someone else if you can, he added. Sometimes the number's wrong. The click when he left the line was small and decent. The receiver was heavier when it held no one. I stepped out into a town that looked exactly the same, and wasn't. The mailman waved. The mayor pretended this wasn't happening. A child pressed both hands to the glass and left perfect prints. The booth rang for months. The stories braided themselves through the town's days. A widow spoke to a daughter who had never lived to turn 12. A gambler refused to pick up and then ran 4 blocks on the 7th ring and found the door stuck and wept in a way that made forgiveness feel like a thing the air could do. The pastor answered once and said nothing after, which is how I knew the call was for him and not for his congregation. One night it rang, and no one was near. The sound bounced off the post office, off the closed bakery, off the statue whose name we'd forgotten. I ran because pie crust can wait, and grief has never been patient. I pulled the door, lifted the receiver, and said hello to buy time. A woman spoke, a voice I didn't know. She said a name that wasn't mine, syllables soft as a lullaby. I told her she had the wrong number. She laughed like turning a page. No, she said, just the wrong hands. And then she asked, is he there? The boy with the blue jacket and the bad haircut? I looked up. Across the square, a kid in a blue jacket hovered, halfway between leaving and staying. He'd been circling the booth for days, waiting for the ring to forgive him for not being brave. I waved him in. He frowned, wary. It's for you, I mouthed. He came, shoulders hunched against a weather that wasn't weather, and I handed him the receiver, the way you hand a bride a bouquet, and hope she remembers what hands were for. He said, Mom, and folded up like paper. After that, I started going on the hour, not because I wanted another call. My brother's 7 minutes were sufficient for a lifetime, but because the booth had become for our town a hinge. We gathered near it the way people gather near fires, they pretend are incidental. We kept a list, not of who had answered, but of who shouldn't have to do it alone. Teenagers, Mr. Rosario, the woman who sells shoes but never tries them on. When the phone company finally sent a crew to remove the booth, complaints from up the chain about liability and vandalism and the threat of rust, the mayor signed the order and then pretended he hadn't. The crew came with wrenches and a truck. The first man touched the door and stepped back with tears in his eyes. The second man made a call from his cell to no one and cried too. They left the booth standing. Paperwork got lost. Rust was patient. The town was more so. It rings less now. The line, I think, has learned our names the way old songs do and doesn't need to practice as much. When it does ring, someone answers. Sometimes it's for the air and not for the hand, and we hang up gently. Sometimes it's for the wrong person, and we pass the receiver until the voice on the other end sighs, relieved, and begins. If you hear it, don't be afraid of the glass or the grime or the way your reflection looks like someone you owe. Step inside, close the little door behind you. Say hello like you mean it, because you do. Don't ask too many questions. Let the voice choose the shape of the 7 minutes. When it's time to go, you'll hear it in the line and in your ribs. And when you hang up, go buy flour and a lemon. Bake a pie for the room that hurts. Lock it and visit once a year with cake and a fork. Answer if it rings for someone else and you're the one standing nearest. We keep each other's calls when we can. That, more than anything, is what makes a town. Now, on to the next story. The first time the shadow crossed the ridge, the bells in the church tower rang by themselves. They didn't clang in panic. They rang politely, as if announcing a visitor. That's how the old people in our village talk about it, like a guest you set a plate for, even though you know he won't eat. Nobody remembers when the shadow began, only that it's older than the road and younger than the river. It is seasonal and not. It comes with storms and also in clear weather. It stains roofs and faces. It chooses a house each time, rests on it until the walls learn to listen, and then moves on. The year it chose ours, my mother boiled basil and hung sprigs over the door. My father chalked a circle around the lintel and said a prayer in a language he only used when he spoke to sleep. I sat on the steps with my chin in my palms and watched the ridge, waiting for the light to do the wrong thing. It did. The shadow didn't fall from a cloud. It rose from the tree line, as if the mountain were exhaling night in the middle of the day. It slid over fields and fences and chicken wire without touching any of them, and settled on our roof with such gentleness. You could almost love it for how carefully it handled what it intended to ruin. Inside, the rooms went quiet, not the good quiet, the kind that makes plates heavy. You'll go to Aunt Marla, my mother told me, tying a scarf under my chin, even though I wasn't cold. You'll sleep there until it passes. I want to stay, I said, because stubbornness felt like love, and I had not yet learned the difference. My father looked at the ceiling as if sound might drip through it. You can stay tonight, he said finally, if you promise not to answer. Answer what? You'll know, he said. We ate early. The soup tasted like boiled nerves. In the corner, the old radio we never used anymore clicked on, hummed without finding a station, and clicked off again. The ceiling cracked in a new direction. Outside, our neighbor's dog lay down and placed its muzzle on its paws, as if it had been scolded by God. At dusk, the shadow thickened. It doesn't grow darker the way evening does. It grows denser, as if it's collecting itself for a thought. When full night came, the house stopped pretending to be anything but a mouth. We bedded in the front room. My mother slept with her shoes on. My father leaned against the wall with his eyes open, as if blinking were an invitation. I lay on the couch and counted the boards in the floor. It was easy math until it wasn't. Some boards doubled and others vanished, and I accepted it because one night is a long time to argue with wood. At some hour that will never belong to a clock, a knock came at the door. Not the door to the street, the door to the attic. We don't have a door to the attic. We have a pull string and a hatch that groans when you ask it to remember you. But that night, a door stood beneath the hatch, painted the exact color of our hallway, trimmed to match our house, fitted with a knob that reflected nothing at all. 3 polite knocks. My father shook his head at me before my muscles could decide to move. "Don't answer," he mouthed. My mother crossed herself with a 4th finger I had never seen. The knocking came again, the polite rhythm that says neighbor, not stranger, that says help me move a chair, borrow a cup of sugar, tell me a story, let me in. "I hear you," a voice said, muffled by wood and distance. "I know you're awake." It wasn't a beggar's voice. It was the voice you use when you've arrived precisely on time to a place that owes you something. "Who is it?" I asked without saying the words. My father's face told me he heard them anyway. "Don't answer," he said aloud, very softly, perhaps to the room, perhaps to the shadow, perhaps to whatever kept track of debts. We breathed together. The house breathed with us. The door to the attic waited the way a lake waits for movement. "I remember you," the voice said, and the trouble with memory is that it makes liars out of gods and men. We were nobody to be remembered. We were a family with a leaking roof and a fence that leaned, but the voice said it the way a teacher says a name at roll call, as if attendance mattered. My father stood. The chalk circle around the lintel wasn't meant for attics, but he placed his palm there anyway, like a man checking his own temperature. "This house is full," he said. "Try the next." The voice made a sound like paper turning. "This house is owed," it said. "It has been owed since before your walls learned how to stand, since before your door decided which way it wanted to open." My mother reached into the stove with bare hands and drew out a coal that didn't hurt her. She placed it in the iron dish we use for salt on feast days. Its light was small and stubborn. It made the corners of the room sit up a little straighter. "You can pass," she told the voice. "You have our permission to cross the courtyard and leave our roof." "The shadow doesn't ask permission," the voice said, and it would have sounded arrogant if it hadn't been so terribly true. The knob turned, not quickly, as if whoever stood on the other side were learning the shape of our handle. The door didn't open. The door learned patience. From the street came the sound of someone walking. One person, then 2, then more, a procession of feet that didn't hurry and didn't drag. Shadows slid under the crack beneath the attic door, long and thin and jointed wrong. They hesitated at the edge of the rug, as if the loom had laid a spell when it lifted its last weft. "Don't answer," my father repeated, closing his eyes as if that could close other things. "It will leave at dawn if you don't answer." "What if someone answered before?" I asked. "What if the shadow expects courtesy? Then the debt is kept," he said, "and we sit with it." He didn't look at me when he said it, because my face has always told the truth, and he needed, just for a second, to pretend otherwise. Ours became a rope we held on to. The voice spoke sometimes, and sometimes the feet spoke instead, and sometimes the house answered with little sounds houses make when they are thinking of settling. The coal dimmed and brightened like a heartbeat. My mother touched my hair every time the light weakened, as if to count me. Near morning, the knocking stopped, not because the voice surrendered, because the shadow moved on. It lifted from our roof with offended dignity and slid to the house across the lane, the widow's place with the blue shutters and the fig tree that never fruits. Her light came on. It went off. It came on again. "We should go to her," I said. "We should not," my father said, and for the first time all night his voice carried authority that had nothing to do with fear. We were spared by not answering. "Don't spend your mercy like coins." We slept in the day and woke sick with the particular guilt of people who survived at someone else's expense. The widow didn't open her windows for a week. When she did, the shutters hung crooked, and her fig tree had grown 3 new branches in the shape of fingers pointing at our roof. At market, the old women told me what they tell all children who watch too closely. The shadow is old. It remembers promises we forgot. It eats lies. It eats kindness too. If you leave it uncovered on a table, it will take what is first offered, and if nothing is offered, it will take the one who asks what it wants. I brought bread to the widow, left it at her door, knocked, and ran the way good intentions run when they know they are late. That night, the shadow chose the house at the far end of the square, the one with the new paint. It pouted there like a scolded child, as if the freshness offended it. The family inside answered immediately, voices raised, questions asked. A radio turned up as if sound could be louder than what the roof was learning. By morning, the paint had wilted. The new door had warped. The father stood in the square, staring at nothing, his jaw moving like a man chewing a memory that won't swallow. It went on like this all spring, the shadow pausing, the bells ringing themselves polite, the village pretending the mountain was just a mountain. Some nights it took a chicken, some nights it took a secret. Once it took the sound of water from every tap for an entire day until we remembered to carry buckets to the well together like we used to. The night it came back to us, we were ready in all the wrong ways. We had boiled new basil, we had chalked circles inside circles, we had collected coals in a bowl, as if light were cumulative. We had not prepared our mouths for silence. The attic door knocked 3 times, then 3 again, not because it was impatient, but because it is a comfort to things that are older than counting to arrange themselves in numbers that remember altars. Please, the voice said, and we had not heard please before. My father's face changed very slightly, not in sympathy, in recognition. He had waited his whole life to hear that word from the shadow, and he had never decided what he would do if it came. Don't answer, my mother whispered, and on her tongue it sounded like prayer and like something else, like apology. The knob turned. The door didn't open. I stood. My legs did it. Not bravery, not foolishness, that biological thing that makes children step forward when they are named, even if no one has said their name aloud. I placed my hand flat on the door and felt not wood, not paint, not cold. I felt my own house looking back at me through the grain. The years our table wobbled, and we propped it with folded paper. The winter the roof let snow in like sugar. The day my father sat with his head in his hands because the bank had a face, and that face did not like him. What do you want? I asked. The voice answered without moving air. Something you can carry, it said, so you do not think you left your debt behind. A small laugh escaped me. It was ugly and human and broke the shape of the room. Fine, I said. Take my sleep. Silence. Then the sound of agreement that exists in the space before 2 hands shake. The knob cooled under my palm. The door receded into the hatch as if doors could be shy. The coal went out without smoke. Foolish, my mother said. One word. Fond as a slap that keeps you from stepping into the road. Wise, my father said, and I heard all the night he'd sat with his eyes open, stored inside the syllable. The shadow left at dawn. It took my sleep with it. It did not take my dreams. It left those because dreams belong to whoever has to carry them, not to the thing that made them heavier. For weeks I forgot how to close my eyes, and when I remembered, my body treated it as a bad habit. I watched the roof tiles of our house collect moonlight. I watched the square empty and fill. I counted the neighbors' breaths through open windows and learned which ones falter and which ones hold. I went to the widow's door and found bread there. Hers for me, and we stood on either side of the wood and said nothing, which is another way of answering. When summer came, the shadow moved up valley, the way weather does when it remembers where it's going. Babies were born. A cow died for reasons that had nothing to do with old debts and everything to do with the day being too hot. The river wrote its same letter across the stones and expected no reply. Sometimes late, I hear 3 polite knocks exactly where a door doesn't belong. I place my hand against the hatch and feel my house remember me. I tell it a small true thing I kept back during the spring, and the wood drinks it like water. The shadow prefers what you think you hid. If it comes to your roof, don't answer. If you must, offer it something you can survive without, and survive without it. And when the bells ring by themselves, set a plate for the guest even if he won't eat. There is a language older than bargains. It sounds like a family breathing together in the dark until the light has the courage to be mourning. For now it is enough. Now, on to the next story. The first time I saw her, she stood at the bend in the road where the guardrail had a dent that matched my car's left fender. Not because I had hit it, I never have, but because after a while, you begin to recognize the shapes your life might make if you stopped paying attention. Her dress was white and wrong for the weather. The fog made lace of the headlights, and her hair lay flat against her skull in that soaked way that means the cold has decided the shape of you. I slowed. You always do, even after you promise yourself you won't. She didn't wave. The ones who wave want something you can give. Phones, rides, cigarettes. The ones who don't want something you don't own. I rolled the window down an inch. You okay? I asked, because there are things you say even when you know they are not the right questions. She stepped into the beam of light. Her face was very pale and very composed, the way the dead are in paintings where artists have mercy. There was a waterline darkening her dress at the hips, as if she had climbed out of a lake and left the lake behind out of politeness. Her eyes did not meet mine. They fixed on the passenger seat. "Can I sit?" she asked, not looking at me, and the grammar was so ordinary, I said yes before the rest of me could vote. The door opened without my hand. The smell of the river climbed into the car and chose a corner. She sat and buckled herself in with careful fingers. The belt lay wrong across her chest, as if it remembered another shape. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Home," she said. The road took us in. The fog swallowed the world beyond my high beams, leaving me a ribbon of brightness to follow and nothing else. We drove past the stretch where the water runs closest, and the sound of it becomes a second engine. She turned her head fractionally toward it, and then away, as if listening to a story that had been told to her too many times. "Did you come from there?" I asked, and regretted the question as soon as it left me. She folded her hands in her lap. They were not cold. They were the temperature of water that has decided to be a body for a while. "Everyone does," she said. We reached the old stone bridge. The county never tore it down because bridges are superstitions you don't want to test. The new road goes around, the old one crosses. I never choose the old one at night, but the fog pulled my hands left, and the car obeyed. Halfway across, she spoke in a voice you use when you remind someone to take a breath. "Don't stop." I didn't. The fog thickened into a wall, and then into a room, and then into a person. A woman stood in the lane ahead, dress whiter than fog, mouth open in a sound I could not hear, because hearing is not the only way to understand. My passenger reached out and laid her hand lightly on my wrist. The car did not slow. The woman blurred, as if my headlights had learned mercy. We passed through the place where she stood, and the engine did not falter, and the fog behind us closed its mouth. At the far side of the bridge, the passenger exhaled for the first time. It sounded like a tide changing its mind. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For not stopping." "Where is home?" I asked. She smiled then. A small, exact thing you could put in your pocket and take out when you needed proof that kindness has weight. "Anywhere away from the water," she said. "For now." The houses returned in cautious clusters. Streetlights remembered themselves. She touched the window with the back of her fingers, as if feeling for a seam. "Here is fine." she said, at a corner with no house. And I pulled over because it's easier than asking for reasons you won't understand. She unbuckled. The seat beside me grew lighter. Will I see you again? I asked before I could stop wanting the answer. She looked at the empty passenger seat and not at me. If you stop, she said, and then the door opened and closed, and nobody stood outside, and the smell of the river gathered itself up and left through the vents. I drove home the long way. I washed my face and did not look into the corners of the mirror. I slept badly and woke with my hands aching from gripping the wheel too long. The next night I took the new road. The fog found me anyway. At the bend with the dent in the rail, she stood exactly where the light likes faces. I rolled my window down an inch as if I could reduce the size of the question by being careful. Can I sit? She asked, eyes fixed on the passenger seat. I nodded. We drove. The old bridge waited. The fog made a door of itself. A woman stood inside the door. My passenger's hand found my wrist without looking. We didn't stop. On the far side, she said thank you, like a child practicing a word her mother taught her. How long will you ride with me? I asked. Until you forget, she said. Forget what? That the road is not a river. We passed the corner where she had vanished the night before. Here, she said again, and her smile was the same exact shape as yesterday's. She left. I drove on. The smell of the river stayed longer this time, like a friend who has decided to be rude because leaving is hard. On the third night, I told myself I would take the highway. I told myself I would shut my eyes to the bend, and the bridge, and the fog, and the shape of a woman standing where the world narrows. I told myself many things. The car did what it wanted. At the bend, no one stood. I felt relief like thirst. At the bridge, the fog leaned in. A woman waited in the lane, dress a white that contains all the other colors. I gripped the wheel and did not slow because I had learned a rule, and rules save lives until they don't. Then I saw her, not on the bridge, but reflected in my windshield, like a ceiling fan you only notice when it stops. My passenger sat beside me, hand on my wrist, eyes on the road. Only she wasn't there. The seat was empty. The belt lay unused. Her hand weighed my wrist and did not. Don't stop, she said from nowhere you could name. I didn't. We crossed. On the far side, the word thank you arrived in the car and landed in the seat like a coin. The fog thinned. The houses returned. At the corner with no house, the door opened and closed for no one at all. On the fourth night, the river came to my street. The asphalt smelled of old water. The drains muttered to themselves. I stood at my window and watched the reflection of a white dress move across the glass where the room behind me should be. It didn't look at me. It looked at the passenger seat. I don't take the bridge anymore. I don't take the new road either. Some nights I don't take roads at all. I walk until the city runs out of places to be, and then I stand very still and try to remember the weight of a hand that may have been mine. If you are driving late and the fog makes doors where there should be air, and a woman asks to sit without looking at you, say yes. Keep the window cracked just enough to let manners in. And when the lane ahead narrows into a room with a mouth, don't stop. Not for the first figure, not for the second, not even for the version of you that stands in the road and begs you to open your own door. Some passengers you carry until you forget. Some roads are rivers when you aren't looking. Some nights kindness is the only bridge that holds. And if she asks where home is, say anywhere away from the water. For now, story 6. They called it the Swallowing Lake. Not in brochures, not in any official way. On maps it had a colonial name that sat on it like a borrowed coat. But the locals called it what it did, the way you name a dog after its worst habit. The lake ate, not quickly, not with violence, with patience. A canoe would slip from its tie and drift toward the center, and then not be a canoe anymore by morning. A buoy would slide a foot down its rope each day until the rope had no slack left, and then somehow found more. The dock had teeth marks in it if you went out at dawn and dared to look closely. Little semicircles chewed into the wet wood where the water had lifted itself and tested what the world was made of. We rented the cabin because it was cheap and because grief makes bad bargains. My brother said the quiet would help. I said quiet is a mirror and we're not ready to see ourselves yet. We went anyway because you go toward water when you don't know what else to do. The first night, the lake knocked politely at the shore. The sound was almost words. We ignored it, the way you ignore a neighbor who wants to talk about weather. You can see yourself. In the morning, our footprints from the night before had softened. By noon, they were gone. The beach smoothed into a blank page. My brother said wind. I said of course. On the second night, a shape drifted in from the middle distance. A tree, we thought. Deadfall loosed from someplace upstream. It came closer without coming closer. The lake is good at that. And when it reached the shallow slope where you can still see bottom, it wasn't a tree. It was a door. Red paint flaked from it, in the way old barns peel. No hinges, no handle. Just a door lying flat in the water, as if the lake had decided to sleep like a house. Don't touch it, I said, because some sentences say themselves. My brother laughed, because laughter is one way to keep a thing where you can see it. He waded into his knees. The water did that cold trick where it climbs, and your body pretends to be brave. He put his hand on the edge of the door and pushed. It moved as if pushing were something it had been waiting for. He turned it toward shore. We dragged it up onto the sand together. It was heavier than its size. Doors remember every hand that ever closed them. There was writing on the underside, pencil scrawled over a child's height and an adult's, names, dates, a list of things that get longer when you're not looking. The most recent entry read like a note someone wrote to themselves and forgot on purpose. If you open it while the lake is speaking, you don't come back the same. We leaned it against the cabin wall, as if it belonged to us now. It made the place look like it had a history beyond a rental agreement. That night, the lake spoke, not out loud. There are rooms inside you that hear things your ears don't. I woke with the door's red pressed against the back of my eyes, and the sound of someone knocking on the underside of water. My brother slept anyway. His body had made its choice. I went to the deck and stood with my hands wrapped in a blanket and watched the lake breathe. The door against the cabin wall cast a thin shadow, as if the moon had drawn it with a hard pencil, and then lifted the pencil carefully so as not to smudge. The knocking continued, not frantic, patient, as if whatever was underneath knew we would open if we decided we were decent. I went down to the sand. The door looked taller at night. I put my ear against the old wood and heard a voice the way you hear your own blood when you lie too long on one side. It said my name in the tone people use when they want to borrow something and intend to give it back. Go away, I said without much conviction. The door answered by not answering. I don't know how long I stood there. The lake's edge crept an inch up the sand, and then two, and then stopped. Good manners again, as if to say, I won't come farther unless invited. At dawn, my brother came down with 2 mugs and tried to hand me warmth I could not hold. We're leaving today, he said, and I nodded because that is the shape a promise makes when it isn't sure it can be kept. We carried the door back to the water together. It floated as if it had been relieved of duty. He turned it so the writing faced down, as if to keep the names from getting wet. I watched his fingers let go one at a time, the way people do when they're practicing their exit. The lake accepted the door and took it toward the center with the same speed it takes everything, slow, certain, kind, if you like a certain kind of kindness. We packed. We cleaned as if a stranger were going to judge us. We put the keys where the email said to. I stood on the deck for a last look and saw the lake's middle pucker, as if something had just decided to open its mouth. Don't look, my brother said. Don't make it a story. On the drive home, the road unspooled and spooled behind us. At a turnout where you can see the lake from above, if you don't mind the guardrail being a suggestion, I told him to stop. He said no, the way you say no to a child who asks to hold a knife. I said please the way you say please when you already did the thing and are asking permission to remember it that way. We pulled over. The lake lay below, very still and very much pretending. In the center, a square of red floated like a mouth that had learned manners and shut itself. Is that my brother began, and then the red tipped, and the lake closed over it without ripple, as if swallowing were the same as never having been hungry. We didn't speak the rest of the drive. At home, the house's familiar corners did that trick where they look new when you return from a place that doesn't have corners. I slept and dreamed the sound of knocking on the underside of something that wasn't the lake anymore. In the morning, my front door had a new scratch low down where your hand goes when you're small. I keep a glass of water by the bed now. I don't drink it. I watch it. Some nights, when the room holds very still, the surface shivers though the air is calm. I tell myself it is trucks on a distant street, a neighbor closing a drawer. Down the hall, my brother runs his shower too long. He sings to cover the knocking. It doesn't work, but it makes a better story. If you go to the swallowing lake, don't bring back souvenirs. Don't write your name on the underside of anything. And if a door floats up to you as if you called it, push it back with both hands and don't read the list. Names are invitations. Lakes collect them. If someone inside the wood asks you to open, ask them this instead. Will you give it back? If they say yes, know that they mean the wrong thing, because lakes don't empty. They learn you. They keep what you were when you stood on their shore and listened too long. And sometimes, at night, the water in your house remembers the shape of a door and knocks until you come to let it in. Now, on to the next story. The first time I heard the question, it wasn't a voice. It was a red window blooming on my laptop screen, square and flat and strangely glossy, as if the color were still wet. Do you like the red room? I closed the lid without thinking. The question stayed behind my eyes the way bright lights do. I told myself it was a pop-up, a prank, some buried file that launched when a certain key combo got brushed by accident. The mind makes up simple answers when you ask it gently enough. That night, the apartment held still. I brushed my teeth with the bathroom door ajar and told myself I wasn't listening for anything. The mirror flickered. Only the cheap light, I said, and the water ran red for the briefest second before clearing. I went to bed. I slept. In the morning, the laptop woke to the lock screen as usual. No red window, no question. Work slid over the hours. I answered emails, paced my calls, pretended the stale coffee was a choice. By evening, I was almost myself again. I cued a video, let it play while I cooked something simple, and when the steam fogged the kitchen window, a square of red appeared in the glass, crisp and perfect, floating behind my reflection. Do you like the red room? The words weren't written, they were implied. The edges of the red making the letters by not being there, like a stencil on the inside of my own sight. I turned, but there was only the oven door, the clock, the sink. The window looked out on the alley. Nobody stood there. No glow from any other building painted that color across the glass. I wiped it with a towel. The square smeared, then bled, then was gone, leaving my reflection pale and thinner than it should have been, as if the red had taken weight with it when it left. I didn't tell anyone. How do you describe a question that asks itself? The third time, it arrived as a whisper in a quiet that didn't feel like mine. I had stayed late at the office to avoid the apartment, and the way the hall lights clicked too long before the bulbs caught. The building emptied. The elevators began their after-hours sighing. I was writing something I didn't care about when the screen blushed red from the center out, like a drop of dye finding the shape of water. The question typed itself in a font I don't own. Do you like the red room? My cursor blinked helplessly. The red window didn't block my work. It sat inside it, as if my document were the one trespassing. I moved the mouse and watched it stutter, sluggish, as if the air had thickened. Then, in the corner of the red, a small black dot appeared and grew and cleared into a camera lens. I saw myself as if from across a room. The camera on my laptop was off. The tiny green LED slept. But there I was, faintly delayed, hands hovering above the keyboard, breath shallow. Behind me, the office stretched out in parallel lines, desks, chairs, tall windows that became mirrors at night. In the reflection of the farthest window, a square of red hung where no screen should be. "Do you like the red room?" "No," I typed. "I don't." The words dissolved into the red like sugar vanishing in tea. The camera view pulsed once, twice, then slowed until the image froze. My own frozen face looked back at me with a little skepticism, as if I had said the wrong thing. When the red finally receded, it did so by degrees, as if a hand were pulling it away from inside the glass. I shut down. I went home. I left the laptop on the kitchen table, like an animal asleep in the sun, and lay on the couch with every light on. The hallway bulb outside buzzed in a way that made the silence inside feel crowded. Past midnight, my phone buzzed against my hip, unknown number. I let it go to voicemail because the unknown is easier if you give it a box. The notification popped up. I pressed play, telling myself if it was a scammer, I'd be angry. Anger is a railing you can hold in the dark, static. Then a small, curious voice, close to the microphone in the way that means the room behind it is very large. "Do you like the red room?" I hung up. The phone rang again immediately. Same number. I pressed decline. It rang again. I turned it off and set it face down. From the kitchen table, the laptop chimed the sound it makes when someone starts a video call. The lid was closed. The chime happened again and again. I stood very still and waited for my breathing to match the room. "No," I said aloud, though nobody had asked. "I don't like it." The apartment swallowed the word like a mouth that doesn't intend to chew. When sleep came, it did so sideways, like a car sliding into a space too small. I woke to a knock, 3 precise taps at the door, as if whoever stood there had been taught manners a very long time ago, and nothing else. The peephole showed me a slice of hallway, the opposite wall, the exit sign bleeding its red into the dim. No one stood outside. Still, the air held the shape of a presence that had recently left and might be waiting only for me to stop looking. In the morning, my laptop lid had shifted a fraction, as if a careful hand had considered lifting it and stopped out of politeness. The screen woke on its own when I passed. The red window blossomed without preamble. "Do you like the red room?" I nodded. I don't know why. Maybe acquiescence buys time. Maybe saying yes to a question does not mean yes to the consequences. I nodded and said, very quietly, "Yes." This time, the red did not recede. It deepened, a color you could step into if you forgot yourself for a moment. Words scrolled up from the bottom of the square, the way credits roll, white on red, names of rooms written as if rooms could be titled like songs. The waiting room, the listening room, the room where you learn not to turn around. Each title had a small thumbnail, just a darker shade in a different corner, so that if you stood back, the whole looked like a tiled wall, 100 doors pretending to be a single one. The cursor slid without my hand. It hovered over the red room. Not a title, a destination. When it clicked, the sound it made was not electronic. It sounded like a fingernail against wood. The camera view opened again. Whatever lens looked back at me sat farther away now, as if the room had backed up and taken the walls with it. I saw myself seated at the kitchen table, the cheap overhead light making a circle on the laminate, the laptop at the circle's center, like an altar someone had built while meaning well and not understanding anything. Behind me, the hallway stood open, longer than my hallway is, lined with doors that were not mine. Red seeped from under each door in a thin ribbon and ran toward the table as if it knew the way. I turned in my chair to prove that the view was a trick. The hallway behind me was the hallway behind me, short, ordinary, the closet door slightly ajar, the coat sleeves visible like tired flags. When I turned back to the screen, the long hall remained, patient and disinterested in my corrections. A door opened somewhere I could not place, not in the apartment. I know the sound of my own doors. This sound was older. It contained the weight of paint over paint, of secrets dried into the grain. Footsteps followed, soft as someone walking barefoot over remembered carpet. They came from the screen. They moved toward me from inside the red. "Who are you?" I asked, because no answer is the same shape twice. The footsteps stopped. A shadow formed at the edge of the camera view, very tall and very thin, as if a person had been stretched to fit a frame too narrow for anything human. When it leaned, the red brightened. I felt heat on my face as if I were close to a fire that has been burning in the same hearth since the house was younger than its foundations. The voice was close to my ear and also very far away, like something spoken down a speaking tube between floors. "Do you like the red room?" "Yes," I said, because the truth was irrelevant and manners mattered to whatever this was, and because the word yes keeps you moving in a conversation that wants you to stop. The red unfolded. The kitchen disappeared and remained. Both. I was still at my table and also standing in a room with no corners. The walls curved in on themselves, the way an eye sees the inside of itself if it forgets to blink. The red had depth without distance. I tried to judge its size and lost count of edges. The only furniture was a chair, exactly like mine, placed at the exact distance you place a chair if you want a person to sit without asking permission. On the chair lay a small white card with black writing in a hand that understood both patience and hurry. "Sit." I did. The chair was my chair. The red breathed. The card turned itself over and became a second card with a second word in the same hand. "Confess. I don't have anything," I said. "I'm ordinary." The red deepened. A third card appeared on the table where my laptop should have been. "Confess. To what? To whom?" My mouth worked. The first thing that came was something small, the kind of sin dull enough to pass the time in a stranger's ear. "I don't answer calls from unknown numbers," I said, "even when I know it might be someone I love." The red accepted this like a teacher taking a paper with a name spelled right, and nothing else correct. The next card was not written in the same hand. The letters were broader, unfamiliar. A different person's confession borrowed my voice. I keep a list of every time I should have said "I'm sorry" and didn't. The red listened. Time moved as if it were waiting. I confessed more. Nothing dramatic. Not the big things you tell when you want to be forgiven like a saint. Small things that bruise real lives. I forgot my father's birthday because I didn't want to think about the year he had. I held a friend's secret too long and let it rot. I saw a stranger crying on a bus and looked away because kindness is exhausting when you haven't eaten. Each confession warmed the room, and the warmth felt like relief until it passed a point and became something else. The red began to smell faintly of iron. I wiped my palms on my jeans, and they came away clean, and not. Red does that. It paints what it wants without proof. "How long?" I asked. "How long do I sit?" The chair behind mine scraped, not against my floor, but against a floor that echoed inside the red. A weight sat down with no body to carry it. The presence leaned forward until it nearly touched the back of my throat. When it spoke, it used my voice from a time before I learned to close doors. "Do you like the red room?" I wanted to say no. I wanted to say I don't know. I said yes, because there is a way to leave a conversation by staying in it, and I did not know any other way out. The room exhaled. The red thinned. then thickened again, like blood clotting and breaking and clotting. The chair across from me was no longer empty. A girl sat there, 14 maybe, hair blunt cut at her jaw, eyes too dry for the story they wanted to tell. She wore a white uniform shirt, the kind that makes 100 students into a single shape, and the collar was stained red in the neat starburst pattern you get when you try very hard to keep something from spreading and fail. She looked not at me but at the space between us, as if the red had put something there that was for her. When she spoke, it was with the careful articulation of the newly dead. "I clicked it," she said, like a fool. I said yes because I thought it was a joke, and then because I thought it was a dare, and then because I thought I could win. She raised her hands. The palms were clean, the backs were not. She smiled in a way that was no longer made of habits learned in a mirror. "They turned my room red," she said, "but not all at once. First the corners, then the threshold, then the inside of me. I breathed too shallowly and saw small white sparks at the edges of my sight. Who turned it?" She tilted her head as if I had mispronounced the only word that mattered. "The room did," she said. "It likes to be liked." Behind her, the red gathered itself like a muscle. A door appeared where there had not been a door, or perhaps had always been a door if you knew how to see doors that are not for you. Someone stood in the doorway, tall, long coat that had once been black if red did not exist. A hand held the door, the way a hand holds a promise it intends to keep, whether you asked for it or not. The face did not belong to any person, not because it was monstrous, but because it was perfectly polite, the sort of face that never gets noticed until it never forgets you. "Don't turn around," the girl said, and her voice sharpened for the first time. "Listen to me. Do not turn around. If you look, it likes you more." The presence behind my chair leaned closer, as if I had invited it by acknowledging it. The smell of iron strengthened. The red around the corners of the room pulsed in time with my heart, and my heart began to listen to it the way a foot falls into step with a drum on a road. "Some rooms are hungry," the girl said. "They eat with their eyes. How do I leave?" My voice was very small and very far away. The red blurred its edges and then brought them back, impatient. "You don't," she said, and then she smiled in the way the living smile when a joke lands exactly between them. "You pretend you already did, and sometimes the room is distracted by someone else pretending harder." She stood. I had not seen her stand, and yet she was standing. The door behind her opened wider, and the tall figure in the coat did not move, which is still a way of moving in rooms like this. She placed her palm on the table between us. It left no mark, and also left one that would be there if I thought about it too long. "Confess the biggest small thing," she said. "Not the worst, the truest. Give the room a shape of you that it can keep while you carry the rest." I closed my eyes. The presence behind me tilted its head. I felt it without any sense that calls itself by name. When I spoke, it was not a decision. It was gravity. "I hurt someone who loved me because I wanted proof they would stay," I said, "and when they stayed, I was angry because the proof was ugly." The red stilled. The chair behind me leaned away. The girl nodded in a way that contained the space between pity and respect. "Now say you like it," she said softly. "Say it like you mean it enough for it to be bored of you. Some courtesies are camouflage." I kept my eyes closed. "I like the red room," I said, and found to my horror and my safety that I meant it while I said it. "I like the red room." The door closed without sound. The air cooled. The red peeled itself off the walls of my apartment and folded into the screen, and then into the corner of the screen, and then into a single pixel that went dark and left nothing behind but its afterimage. I was alone at my kitchen table. My laptop showed my work document, half finished, blank where the red had been. My phone lay face down and polite. In the hallway, the closet door had shut itself to an appropriate angle. The next night, the mirror didn't flicker. The water ran clear. The window glass reflected only my face and the square of night behind it. But sometimes, when the apartment is very quiet and my breathing forgets to be loud, a red glow gathers in the far corner, small as a pulse, patient as a waiting room. If I turn my head too quickly, it goes away. If I don't turn at all, it becomes a question that asks itself, "Do you like the red room?" I say yes now in my head before it speaks. I say yes because that is the price of not turning around. Because some rooms are doorways, and some doorways are mouths, and some mouths are kind. If you feed them table scraps you never meant to eat. On good nights, the red stays a dot. On bad ones, it becomes a square, and the square becomes a window, and I sit very still and confess small true things until the room is too full of me to notice I have not given it all. And I don't turn. I do not turn. I let the politeness behind me lean and never learn the back of my eyes. And in the morning, when the light is ordinary again, I brush my teeth with the door open and count the corners of my rooms, 1, 2, 3, 4, and try not to think about the fifth one that waits when the lamps are off. Do I like the red room? I like it enough to be alive. Now, on to the next story. The river at night had a sound all its own. Not just water moving, but something deeper, like whispers hidden in the current, rising and falling with every bend. When I was a kid, I used to love it. That rushing noise lulled me to sleep on nights when the windows were open and the summer heat pressed down. But that night, that sound felt different. I had stopped by the bridge out of habit. It was late, and I was driving back from a visit with friends. The highway was faster, sure, but when I wanted quiet, I cut through the back roads along the water. The river ran beside the road for miles, dark and restless, and the bridge was its spine. That night, the quiet wasn't comfort. It pressed against the windows of my car, thick and deliberate. The bridge appeared in my headlights, a pale arc of old wooden planks stretched over black water. The wood rattled as my tires touched it, the sound amplified by the stillness around me. Halfway across, I saw her, a figure in white, standing at the far end. Her dress was long, torn at the hem, clinging damply to her legs. Her hair was black and heavy, dripping in loose strands that masked her face. She wasn't moving, just waiting. I slowed. At first I thought she might be someone in trouble. Maybe a drunk wandered too far. Maybe someone had been stranded. But the air in the car shifted, suddenly colder, sharp enough to sting my lungs. My gut told me to keep driving, not to stop, not even to slow down. Her head lifted as my headlights washed over her. Her face was pale as moonlight, her eyes dark and wet. When she opened her mouth, the sound that came out didn't belong to a human throat. It was louder than it should have been, filling the car, the bridge, the night itself. A wail, a scream, grief, rage, hunger, all tangled into one endless sound. I floored the gas. The car jolted across the remaining planks, engine roaring. In the rearview mirror, she was suddenly closer, too close, as if distance didn't matter. Her arms were outstretched, fingers long and thin, reaching for the trunk of my car like she could drag it into the water by sheer will. Then, nothing. The sound stopped. The mirror was empty. I didn't stop driving until the town lights reappeared, and even then, I couldn't stop shaking. 2 days later, I told my grandmother about it. I expected her to laugh, to say I'd let shadows and fog get to me. Instead, her face went pale in a way I'd never seen. She crossed herself and whispered, "La Llorona." I'd heard the name before. Every kid in my town had. A story told to scare children into behaving. A woman who had drowned her own children in a river, then drowned herself in grief, condemned to wander the waterways forever, wailing for what she lost. But hearing the name from my grandmother in that hushed, fearful way made the story feel heavier, older, like it wasn't just a story, but something carved into the bones of the land. You must never stop for her, my grandmother said. No matter how real she looks, no matter how she cries, she will drag you down with her into the water, and you will never come back. I didn't tell her how close I had come to stopping. For weeks after, I avoided the river. If I had to drive near it, I kept the windows rolled up tight and the music loud, just to drown out the possibility of whispers in the current. But fear is stubborn. It waits. The more you try to ignore it, the sharper it becomes. One night, driving home late, I found myself on the same stretch of road. I hadn't meant to take it. I hadn't even been thinking. My hands had steered me there out of habit, like an old route carved into muscle memory. The tires hummed over familiar ground, and the sound of the river grew louder in my ears. The bridge appeared ahead, pale under the moon. My chest tightened. She was there again. This time she stood in the middle of the bridge, directly in my path. I slammed the brakes without meaning to. The car shuddered to a halt yards from her. My headlights washed over her figure. The white dress clung as though freshly soaked. Her hollow eyes glimmered. She raised one arm and pointed directly at me. Her lips moved. The sound slipped into my ears like a whisper from inside my skull. Help me. The words hit me harder than the scream had. They sounded broken, desperate, human. For a moment, against all reason, I thought of opening the door. She wasn't a monster, I told myself. She was a grieving mother, trapped in sorrow. What harm could it do to listen? Then movement below caught my eye. In the water beneath the bridge, shadows shifted. Pale hands broke the surface, small, childlike, reaching upward. The air filled with voices, high-pitched, insistent, overlapping cries of "Mama, Mama." The woman's face twisted. The whisper became a shriek. She lunged forward, and the bridge shook under my tires. I slammed the gas. The car leapt forward, headlights blinding her. She vanished at the instant I should have struck her. In the mirror she stood behind me, arms raised, wailing as though cursing the sky. The children's voices rose in a deafening chorus, then fell silent all at once. By the time I crossed the county line, my hands were shaking so badly I could hardly keep the wheel straight. I told myself I wouldn't drive that road again, but curiosity is another kind of hunger. I started asking around, quietly, carefully. People always went missing near that bridge. A trucker once called dispatch to say a woman in white was waving him down. His rig was found empty the next morning, engine still running, door open. A teenager claimed he'd seen her too. He said she gave him a rideshare request from a dripping phone, water still streaming from the speaker when it rang. The boy vanished a week later. The locals, especially the older ones, never cross after dark. They avoid the river, avoid the bridge. If you press them, they'll tell you the same thing my grandmother did. La Llorona searches. She searches forever, and if she finds you, she never lets go. For months I stayed away. I moved apartments just to be farther from the water. I told myself it was over, but it wasn't. The first time I heard her away from the river, I thought I was dreaming. I woke in the night to the faint rush of water. Not pipes, not appliances. A river, close and insistent, and beneath it, a woman's voice, sobbing just beyond the walls. I told myself it was a nightmare, but the sound came again and again, sometimes louder, sometimes faint, sometimes just a breath of it as I drifted off to sleep. One night I went to the window. The street was dry, the night was still, but if I listened carefully, I could hear footsteps in water, slow, deliberate, pacing, searching. It doesn't matter if I move. It doesn't matter how far I drive. She's not waiting at the bridge anymore. She's waiting for me, and I know someday I'll cross again. Now, on to the next story. The crackling of twigs beneath my boots was the only sound breaking the hush of the forest. It was that hour when the light hasn't quite given up, but every color feels drained, as if the world is holding its breath. I've always loved solo camping, the ritual of it. the honesty. But that evening, the trees were different. They leaned in, their dark fingers reached and tangled overhead, and what little sky remained seemed far away, the way a ceiling feels when you're feverish. I told myself I was being dramatic. Too many nights working late, too many city horns and sirens still rattling the edges of my thoughts. I paused and let my backpack settle against my spine. One more mile, maybe two, and I'd find a clearing, a small fire, tea, silence that didn't feel like it was listening. Beautiful evening for a hike, isn't it? I hadn't heard him approach. A man stood half a dozen paces off the trail, tall and lean, the kind of lean that comes from using your body more than feeding it. His coat was canvas, sun-faded and neatly patched. His face was weathered in the way of people who stand in real weather for real reasons. Everything about him felt ordinary, except his eyes. They were bright, sharp, and endlessly curious, as if I was a puzzle with only one piece missing. "Yeah," I said, steadying my breath, "just trying to find a spot before dark." "You're in luck," he said with the kind of cheer that felt rehearsed. "There's a perfect clearing just up ahead. You won't find a better one before night takes the trail. Come on, it's not far." Every instinct I had put its hands on my shoulders and leaned backward. I almost said I preferred to camp alone, that I had a map, that I was fine. But sunset was stealing the path one shadow at a time, and I was tired. I nodded and fell into step beside him. He knew the woods. He pointed to a thistle under an alder leaf and called it by a name I didn't know. He tapped a cluster of stones and said there had been a stream here once, years ago, before a storm rearranged the hillside. He knew where birds nested and what the wind meant when it ran cold. His knowledge should have comforted me. It almost did. "What brings you out here alone?" he asked, glancing back with that mild, affable smile. "City gets loud." "Sometimes," I said. "Needed the quiet." He nodded thoughtfully. "Quiet is honest out here. The woods have a way of keeping you." The way he said keeping made the hair on my arms rise, as if the word had a second meaning he was tasting. We stepped into the clearing as the last light failed. It was, as promised, perfect, flat ground, a ring of stones darkened by old ash, a fallen log at the edge for sitting. I let my pack slip to the dirt and rolled my shoulders. "This is great," I said. "Thanks." "Oh, it's my pleasure." He didn't leave. "Let me help you set up. It'll be dark soon. 4 hands beat 2. "That's okay," I said, suddenly aware of how alone we were. "I've got a system." "Nonsense." He crouched and started pulling out tent poles as if they were his. "Wouldn't want you fumbling around in the dark." I hesitated. It felt ruder to argue than to let him help, so I didn't. We worked in a rhythm that was almost comfortable, except for the way his eyes kept flicking to the tree line, as if he expected the forest to answer a question neither of us had asked. He would ask me something quick and personal. "Do you live alone? Do you have family who know where you are?" And then before I could reply, he would change the subject. Plants, weather, rivers, as if the questions weren't his, but the interruptions were. The tent rose, the sky fell. We finished by moonlight. The clearing, spare and tidy, began to feel like a stage with no audience. I stood and stretched. "Well," I said, making it a dismissal, "I appreciate the help. I'll be fine from here." He stepped closer, not touching, but close enough to feel present in the air. "You've done well," he said, voice lowered, "but there's still so much to do before the night is through." My chest tightened. "You should probably get back," I said gently, "before it gets too dark to find your own camp." He tilted his head, and that small, harmless smile bent the wrong way. "Oh, I am exactly where I need to be. You see, these woods, they get hungry, and it's been so long since we've had a visitor." I took a step back. Somewhere, an owl made a single sound, and then thought better of it. I considered the tent. My phone was inside. along with the illusion of safety, and he saw me consider it. He positioned himself without seeming to, just enough to place his body between me and the zippered flap. "Let's not be rash," he said, hands raised in a friendly gesture that only made my heart beat harder. "The night is young. We have so much to discuss." "I don't want trouble," I said. "We can go our separate ways." "But trouble already found you," he said softly. "It was waiting the moment you stepped off the road and onto the old path. Did you not feel it? The way the branches leaned in to listen? The way the quiet thickened in your throat? You've been on the wrong trail since you chose it." I turned to run. He moved faster than he looked capable of, catching my wrist with a grip that was dry and strong as a root. I stumbled, the ground coming up too quickly, the smell of old leaves in my mouth. "Please," I said, airless with panic. "I won't tell anyone. I'll go back tonight." "The forest chose you," he murmured, and something in his voice uncoiled from very far away. "And now you will keep it fed." The trees around the clearing shifted, not in a wind. I would have felt wind. It was more like the woods were settling deeper into themselves, drawing nearer, their shadows thickening until they seemed almost human. At the edge of my vision, something darker than dark flickered between trunks and vanished. I forced my hand free. It was clumsy and desperate. My fingers closed around a broken branch, heavier than it looked, and I swung. The sound surprised me. Wood on bone, a dry knock. He reeled back, not in pain, but with the baffled expression of someone unaccustomed to being interrupted. It was enough. I ran. Branches whipped my face. The trail disappeared. There was only forward, then left, then anywhere that wasn't where I had been. Behind me, the man's voice rose and fell, never quite shouting, always near enough to hear. The trees overlapped, the ground tilted and slid in ways that didn't match how hills should behave. I ran until my breath became a knife and then farther. When I finally stopped, it was because my legs decided without me. I leaned against a trunk and tried to swallow my heartbeat. The moon had climbed, and its light lay shattered on the leaves. I listened for his steps, his voice, the crisp, casual questions he seemed to ask for somebody else. Nothing, just the layered quiet that lives in very old places. Then a twig spoke behind my left shoulder, very softly, footsteps, deliberate and patient. He wasn't calling anymore. He didn't need to. I pressed myself against the bark. I became smaller than myself. He would pass me. He had to. And I could turn and move and turn again until the trees forgot who I was. A hand clamped over my mouth. I tried to scream. The sound became a small, helpless noise in my throat. The hand was strong and reassuring in a way that made no sense. "Shh," a voice breathed in my ear, very close and very calm. "I'm trying to help you." It wasn't his voice. It was a woman's, quiet as water on stone. The hand loosened, but didn't leave. I turned my eyes without turning my head and saw a face near mine, pale in the moonlight, hair pulled back so it wouldn't catch on branches. There was a smudge of ash on her cheek, and her expression was alert, not afraid. "Can you walk silently?" she whispered. I nodded. She removed her hand and took my wrist this time, the way someone might guide a sleepwalker. We slid between trees like thoughts slipping between words. She didn't ask if I was okay. She didn't say it would be all right. Silence was the kindest thing she could have offered. We moved for a long time. The woods opened and closed. Once she stopped and crouched, palm pressed to the earth as if listening. She changed direction without explaining why, and I followed because explanation was a luxury and trust was oxygen. At last the trees parted in a thin oval, a clearing no wider than a small room. Symbols had been cut into the bark of the surrounding trunks, clean and careful, the grooves dark like old writing. In the center stood a stone broad and flat as a table, its surface carved with meandering lines that caught the moon and held it. "What is this place?" I whispered because whispering felt required. as if the clearing had rules even words had to obey. The heart, she said, and the tether. She stepped into the moonlight and looked older than her face. He is bound to the woods. He draws from them and feeds them in turn. That's how he's lived this long. That's how he knew you'd come. She looked at me without pity. People think the trail is theirs because they walk it. They don't ask who laid it down. How do you know this? I asked. Her mouth tightened, not quite a smile, because I tried to leave once. A sound reached us, soft like breath over a bottle's mouth. He was moving somewhere just beyond the carved trees. The woman put her fingers on my arm, not to comfort, but to steady us both. The bond works both ways, she said. Break the stone, break his shape, for a time anyway. Long enough to get you past the edge where the road still remembers itself. For a time, I repeated. The wind, which hadn't been there a moment ago, turned the leaves over in unison, so their pale undersides showed. Nothing is ever gone, she said, just moved. We don't have to outrun forever, just tonight. The clearing breathed. The man stepped between two marked trunks and smiled the way a family man smiles at a small child, kindly, keenly, already certain of the outcome. There you are, he said to the woman. I wondered how long you'd hold out before bringing her here. You always were practical. She didn't answer. She moved to stand between him and the stone, and in the moonlight, I saw that what I'd taken for bracelets on her wrists were thin, silvered scars. The old lines are wearing thin, he went on, conversational in a way that felt obscene. We haven't had a proper guest in months. I was beginning to think the trail had forgotten its manners. She isn't yours, the woman said. He laughed softly. If she stands here, she is already ours. He stepped forward. She stepped with him. Their bodies met like opposing currents. No flourish, no stalling, just sudden strength against strength that looked wrong, coming from such ordinary frames. He was stronger. It showed in the small ways, the way her feet slid a fraction, and his didn't, the way his smile did not change. But she knew how to counter what he was, how to angle elbows and hips to spoil leverage. They struggled without sound. Don't let him touch the stone, she said without looking at me. I moved, not quickly and not bravely, just inevitably, because some moments choose you. A shard of rock lay at the base of the flat stone, where a corner had once broken. I picked it up and felt it bite my palm. The markings swam under the moon, lines overlapping lines in a language that had never been meant for mouths. The man saw me. Something shifted in his face, like surprise learning the shape of anger. He shoved the woman hard enough to send her to one knee and lunged, his hand outstretched toward the center of the carved lines. I brought the rock down with everything I had. The sound that came up out of the ground was not from any throat. The trees bowed without wind. The markings flared and darkened, and then seemed to detach from the stone entirely, rising into the air like smoke before tearing themselves into shreds that vanished as they fell. The man convulsed, not like a person in pain, but like a shape remembering it had never truly been a person to begin with. He reached for me and didn't reach. He was near and also very far away. His smile at last left his face. What replaced it was older and endlessly empty, and looking at it felt like standing on a cliff with no bottom beneath you. Run, the woman said, already pulling me, already upright, as if she had rehearsed this ending for years. Now, the earth cracked in narrow, puzzling ways that swallowed nothing and opened nowhere. The forest's scream became something like silence again, then a roar, then silence. We ran, falling and catching, dodging branches I barely saw, stepping where she stepped because that was the only place the ground would agree to be ground. And then the trees ended. There was a ditch, then the stubborn geometry of a road. Its paint faded to the color of old teeth. A car's headlights carved the dark in half and squealed to a stop because two figures had appeared out of nowhere with wild eyes and leaf-slashed hands. We tumbled into the back seat before the driver could decide to be afraid. The woman said an address I didn't recognize in a voice that allowed no argument, and the car obeyed. I turned to the window as if it were the last page of a book, and I wanted to read the final sentence twice. The forest had gone very still. A pale, unnatural mist unrolled from between the trees and spread across the ditch like a blanket someone was pulling up to someone's chin. For an instant, only that I saw a taller darkness inside the mist, the outline of a man unthreading itself, and I thought I heard him whisper my name as if he were trying to remember how it ended. We didn't speak until we were 2 towns away. The driver kept looking at us in the mirror and choosing, each time, not to ask. The woman's breathing gentled. Mine followed. By the time the car stopped, the horizon was beginning to pale in the east, and the wind smelled faintly of rain. She got out first and stood with the door open, waiting for me to follow. We stood together in the quiet of a street that had not yet decided to wake. "Will he?" I began. "Not tonight," she said, "and if you're careful, not soon." I wanted to ask 100 other questions. How long had she lived out there, learning the shape of his rules? How many others had made it to the stone with her? How many had not? But her face had settled into a calm I didn't want to break, and my body had begun to remember it was human and fragile and very tired. "If you ever go back," she said softly, "choose the new paths, the ones cut by hands you know. Old trails keep old promises." "I won't go back," I said. She smiled then, a real one, small and almost surprising. "We always say that." She closed the door and tapped the roof twice, and the car took me away. I never camped alone again. I never went far enough from streetlights to forget their names. I told myself the world was smaller than I had believed, and it helped until it didn't. Some nights, lying awake in that patient space before sleep, I hear a boot on dry leaves, and the old quiet leans in from the corners of the room. On those nights I count the walls, 1, 2, 3, 4, and I tell myself that a house is a promise with nails in it, and promises hold. Most nights it's enough, but sometimes, when the wind threads the alley just right, I swear I hear a man's voice outside my window, careful and friendly and endlessly curious, practicing my name like a song he knows he will get to finish at last. I hope you enjoyed that one. Now on to the next story. They say driving strangers is safe enough, but what if the stranger already knows everything about you? The streets were empty in that strange way only cities can manage. A place that roars with life in daylight, reduced at midnight to dark glass, shuttered doors, and the occasional hiss of a distant bus. My rideshare app pinged. Another pickup, Oakwood Avenue, 15 minutes, easy money. I'd been driving nights for months, and I liked it better than the day shifts. Fewer drunks, fewer kids with blasting music, fewer small talk conversations I had to fake, just long stretches of quiet and the occasional polite rider. Something about that night, though, felt off. Maybe it was the way the streetlights flickered as I pulled over, or maybe it was the man waiting for me. He was tall, dressed in a dark coat that looked too heavy for spring. A wide-brimmed fedora hid most of his face. He didn't wave, didn't smile, just opened the rear door and slid in like he'd been expected. "Evening," I said, forcing a lightness into my tone. "Oakwood Avenue, right?" He nodded once. His eyes caught mine in the rearview mirror, cold, measuring, like he was making notes I couldn't see. I pulled away from the curb, the car filled with silence, thicker than most rides. Normally I'd try small talk, but something about him told me not to. The tires hummed, the city unspooled in shades of gray. "You drive at night often?" he asked finally. His voice was low, gravelly, touched with an accent I couldn't place. "Yeah, few nights a week. Helps pay the bills," I said, keeping my eyes on the road. "Must meet all sorts of interesting people." "Sometimes," I said, "mostly just folks trying to get home." He leaned forward slightly, and I could feel his eyes boring into the back of my head. "And you? What brings you into this line of work?" The way he said you made it sound like I was the first specimen in a long experiment. I forced a laugh. Oh, flexible hours. Works with my schedule. Your schedule, he repeated slowly, like he was rolling the word around on his tongue. And what else does your schedule involve? My hands tightened on the wheel. Not much. Work, sleep, repeat. Ordinary, he said, almost to himself. So very ordinary. The silence that followed was worse than the questions. We drove deeper into the city's outskirts, where houses grew sparse and the roads narrowed. I didn't recognize the neighborhood. My GPS still showed the route to Oakwood Avenue, but the streets looked wrong, like they'd been rearranged. Tell me about your family, he said suddenly. My blood ran cold. I hadn't mentioned family, ever. I don't really have much family, I lied. It's just me. No, he said softly. That's not true. Not what your profile says. There's a sister. Millbrook, isn't it? Lovely little town. My mouth went dry. My rideshare profile didn't list anything like that. Not my sister, not her town. My voice shook. You must have me confused with someone else. His chuckle filled the car, low and mocking. Oh, I don't think so, Sarah. The sound of my own name in his mouth made my heart skip. How do you? I began, but stopped. My instinct screamed. Don't give him more. Keep driving, he said. The friendliness in his tone had been replaced by steel. We're not finished yet. I flicked a glance in the mirror. He was watching me, his hand sliding inside his coat. My pulse spiked. I didn't want to know what he was reaching for. Without thinking, I slammed on the brakes. The car shrieked to a halt. The man lurched forward. I ripped my seatbelt loose, threw open the door, and bolted into the night. The street was unfamiliar. Houses crouched dark and silent. My shoes hammered pavement. Behind me, a car door slammed and footsteps followed. He was faster than I expected. His breathing never changed pace. Steady, relentless. I darted between two buildings, my lungs burning. The night smelled of asphalt and rust. My foot caught an uneven crack, and I went down hard, palms and knees scraping. Before I could scramble up, a hand clamped around my ankle. I kicked wildly, screaming, but his grip was iron. He dragged me back with terrifying ease. In the pale light, his face loomed above me for the first time. His grin was manic, his eyes bright with a predator's glee. Now, he said, mock gentle. Running already? We were having such a lovely conversation. I twisted, desperate. What do you want from me? He tilted his head, studying me like a puzzle. I want to play a game. From his coat, he pulled a knife. Long, curved. It caught the moonlight. My stomach dropped. It's simple, he said, crouching beside me. I ask questions. You answer truthfully. For every lie, he let the knife gleam closer to my skin. There are consequences. What if I refuse? I whispered. His grip tightened painfully. That's not an option. The game has already begun. He smiled. First question, why did you really start driving at night? I froze. The truth was embarrassing, vulnerable, but lying felt worse. I was avoiding someone, I admitted. An ex, he wouldn't leave me alone. I thought working nights would make it harder for him to find me. The man's smile widened. Honesty suits you. Next question, what's your greatest fear? My breath shook. Being helpless, I whispered, losing control of my own life. His eyes glinted. Interesting. And right now, how in control do you feel? Tears stung my eyes. Why are you doing this? Who are you? He leaned closer, his knife tracing the air above my arm. I know everything about you, Sarah. Your hopes, your fears, even your little secrets you thought no one saw. And what I want, he smiled a smile that belonged in no human mouth, is to see if you're worth keeping. My heart thundered. I had seconds, maybe. His questions weren't a game. They were a ritual. The way his voice lingered on words, the way the knife gleamed, the way the night felt heavier with every truth. He was feeding something, drawing it out of me. But if he needed me alive to keep playing, then maybe, just maybe, I had a chance. When he leaned closer, I jerked my knee upward, slamming it into his chest. He staggered, grip loosening just enough. I shoved him back and scrambled to my feet, sprinting into the dark. This time I didn't look back. I ran blind until the houses thickened again, until a main road opened in front of me. Headlights cut through the dark. I stumbled into the street, waving frantically. A car screeched to a halt, horn blaring. I threw myself against the door, gasping, begging. The driver's face was a blur of confusion and alarm. Behind me, the street stretched empty. The man was gone. The police never found him. My app showed no record of that ride. No pickup, no destination. As if the passenger had never existed. I deleted the app that night and never drove again. But sometimes when I walk home late, I hear footsteps behind me. Slow, steady, measured. And when I glance over my shoulder, I catch the flash of a fedora brim in the corner of my vision, gone before I can be sure. If you ever drive alone at night, remember this: not every passenger is a stranger. Some are already waiting for you. Thank you for listening. If this story kept you company tonight, consider liking the video and subscribing for more myths, legends, and gentle hauntings. Sleep well, and may the trails you choose lead you safely home.